Chapter 91, Return. Under the rising moon, Ralph ran anxiously and swiftly in the birch tree forest after nightfall. The Phantom Wind Follower's J-shaped, flexible steel prosthetics had a huge surface area at the part that was supposed to be his foot to maintain stability. It always gave him a weird feeling when he walked on flat surfaces, but surprisingly, the wide surface area allowed him to hurry on and walk comparatively easier on snowy ground, especially under the circumstance where he was steering the wind. It felt like he was practically walking on flat ground. However, Ralph did not have any experience in tracking something across snowy ground. He had also never lived in the north, which was filled with snow that never melted. Constellation's Central Territory only witnessed seasonal sporadic snowfall, while the long and narrow Camus Union as well as the 5 city-states to the southeast were dry and warm. This posed as an extremely big problem for him to track down anyone despite being the first person who discovered the unusual condition of Serena's carriage and immediately chased after it. Ralph's wind control psionic power allowed him to be able to move around freely in the narrow and crowded Red Street Market like a fish in water. His speed in the dense birch forest was not any slower. Nevertheless, he had to find that boy. That boy who gave the Phantom Wind Follower a new life. Ralph passed through the forest and saw the flat snow-covered ground ahead. His gaze suddenly focused at one spot. A shudder went through the Phantom Wind Follower's body as he landed on the snowy ground. Under the moonlight, a coquettish woman wrapped in a cape gently released her grip. A young boy about 7 or 8 years old, whose hands were tied behind his back, fell from her grasp without any response and landed on the snowy ground like a murdered prey. He was not moving at all. That coquettish and alluring woman turned around slightly. She licked her lips in Ralph's direction and smiled strangely at him. No. Ralph fell to his knees on the snowy ground in disbelief. His trembling hands reached out to the boy, whose eyes were closed. No breathing. No heartbeat. No pulse. No. This boy. This adult-like boy. This boy who gave me a choice. This boy who saved me from the abyss of despair. This mysterious boy who taught me how to read, spell, and use sign language to communicate. He is dead. No. Ralph lifted his head. Half of his face was hidden behind the silver mask, so it was difficult to read his expression. What is it? Serena Corleone tilted her head and blinked in an alluring manner. Oh, are you here to find little Thales? Ralph clenched his fists tightly as he slowly stood up. His gaze was filled with anger and rage as he stared at the seductive, charming woman. Sorry, he fell asleep. Serena chuckled. You can go and look for him in your next life. A fierce wind suddenly blew across the flat ground. Serena's expression immediately changed. The wind became stronger and stronger. It blew up the snow surrounding Ralph, making all of his clothing bulge up. The Phantom Wind Follower glared at Serena. He did not know how strong this woman before his eyes was. But he would do everything he could to make the other party pay. This way, he could consider the debt he owed that boy cleared. But in the next moment, Ralph discovered to his surprise that his entire body became rigid. He was unable to move. What is going on? He moved his eyes. Is it this woman? Serena laughed in delight. Her vision never left Ralph from the start to maintain the pressure of the halting gaze. Children nowadays, she pouted and shook her head as if she was troubled. Then she pointed at the corner of her eyes as she stared at Ralph, who was frozen in place. She clicked her tongue and said, Do you not use your brain when you fight? It's so dark. It's so black. I cannot feel time. There's also no space. Why is it suddenly bright? It's too bright, it's piercing into my eyes. These are all memories? So many memories. Different scenes which were either familiar or unfamiliar flickered before his eyes one after another swiftly. It was extremely disorderly. Eventually, only one chaotic voice was left. The center limit theorem provided enough basis for our random sampling, don't doze off. Learn and master these things, at least after you graduate, you can work at any company's market research department. What was this? Sheeran, if you reach a different world that is waiting to be saved, would you try to become stronger, farm, introduce science and technology to them, or strive to conquer the land? Would you want to change it? Forget about it. The changes of society can never be fathomed, unless I am the god of creation. Alright, in conclusion, it is meaningless to ask you this question. What's with that gaze? It's filled with scorn. It's such a familiar voice. The topic of hierarchy is often combined with inequality. Education, income, capital, these are all frequently seen nouns. Blau and Duncan, remember these 2 academicians. They will be your nightmare in the next 2 years. During our time, if you didn't know about logistic regression, don't even dream about performing an analysis on social hierarchy. This is so confusing. Why is there no logic in all these combinations? Why are you so confused? Just one word, are we going to get together? What are you furrowing your eyebrows for? Why does everything seem like déjà vu, but look like it's being separated by a layer of fog? The key to the logistic regression model is on this probability distribution. The probit model is actually similar to it. If you only know about the usual linear regression and have no knowledge on logistic regression, then don't even think about saying that you have learned about linear regression. There's no other reason to it. I just think that it'll be incredibly embarrassing if you don't know about it. Where am I? Everyone classified him as one of the 3 great masters, but Weber's paraphrasing of Eulenberg's theory and scientific argumentation, some radical scholars, including myself, believe that his philosophy, which he created as he sat in his chair, was truly an insult to our field. What are these memories? But those names are so familiar. Symmetric matrices can be used to express the one model social network, whereas the two model network is more complicated. Look at all the dumb looks on your faces. Have you never learnt about linear algebra before? If you have never learnt about advanced mathematics, what makes you think that you have the ability to master this subject? What a load of bull. Wait a minute, I think I know what these are. I learned all these things before, even wrote and taught them before. I don't know why we worked so hard to pay for your education, but the Wu family always had this though. Knowledge may not always be useful, but it is always priceless. Who is talking? Just what are these? For example, teachers, school locations, social classes, parents' income, and different factors that cause an effect on the student's results always play a role in different levels of a person's life. Some will be on a personal level, some on a social level, while some on an educational level. If we don't draw a distinction on the impact of the different levels but simply assume that they have the same effect throughout, the conclusion derived for what has the greatest impact on a student's results will not be persuasive. So, pedagogy commonly uses the hierarchical linear model to overcome this point, and this principle is also applicable to our research. I know about this, I definitely know about this, damn it, why can't I recall it? Marx and Weber had entirely different opinions on the country's autonomy. The difference between the two various powers of a country as defined by man is, didn't you read the text? Couldn't finish reading it? Then, why didn't you sleep less to finish reading it? Wait a minute, who am I? Those people who treat Scott Paul as their head started to rethink Marx's social schema and Parsons's macroeconomic theory. The society embedded in history may not operate as predicted. Historical analysis based on traditional methods returned before our sight like this. What am I? Do not assume that the qualitative method does not have to be measured. It is the exact opposite. We do not have the distinct and clear scientific criterions as those present in measurement system analysis, so we need argumentation even more to explain the scientific nature of the reason why this method is used, and enable the research axis to take root in your field. Otherwise, there is no difference to us conducting scientific research compared to us writing a news article. You may as well change your main field of study to mass communications and become a news reporter. I can assure you that you will learn even more than this. However, the following voice was a lot clearer, and it stirred up his memory even more. Bears, no matter what method needs to be carried out, keep him in the capital. He will continue to live, hold him, this is my flesh and blood. You know how I will react if you fail. This one is named Thales, allocate him to the 6th house. Look at this foolish appearance, little shit, I guarantee you would not live till your 2nd year. No. Don't hit me. Don't. I am only, You really don't want to drink water? It is obviously just next door. Listen to me, I will think of the plan. My name is Karak. I heard you are the head of this house? From today onwards, all of you have to give me half of your money. This is the last medication, and you will get no more. You, don't come here again in the future, wait. Here are some old clothes, you can take them. Little shit, you must call me Big Sister Jayla. The newborn mystic made a foothold high above the gods and watched over the other living things. You can say no, but you cannot refuse. This is only the first time you lost control. I know that you have within yourself something he does not. King Nuvan wants justice, right? Take my son's life in exchange for his son's life. A mass of unprecedented flashbacks appeared in his mind within one moment. It crammed his consciousness to the point that it almost exploded. Suddenly, everything became silent. Darkness arrived once again. It felt so much more comfortable. He was tired. Maybe he ought to leave now. Go back to the place he came from. Or perhaps, just die. At this very moment, 2 unfamiliar voices rang in his ears. One voice sounded old. This soul, oh, this is unprecedentedly first class, mother felt it. The other voice was flat and sharp. Wait a minute, the smell of danger, it is the same as 600 or 700 years ago. Thou art always cautious and prudent, be rest assured, mother will surely handle this. No, it is not thoroughly dead, such powerful vitality. No one is providing help from above, but it is still rising. According to this trend, it does not need long before it will rise back to the surface. Yes, I can feel it. Mother is still hesitating. She is not averse to it, but also does not like it. Oh my God. Why are you panicking so much? Have you seen this type of mixed blood and mixed soul? How is it possible? Unless Alchemy Tower and Soul Tower work together. Do not lose your composure. Adhere strictly to your duty. Care less about the matters on the ground. Besides, the 3 great magic towers have been destroyed for 1,000 years. 1,000 years, right? My long-term memory has deteriorated again. Mother has made a decision, let it drift freely. Allow it to rise again, prepare to open the countercurrent gate. Countercurrent gate? Seriously? There was one who rose just over 30 years ago, the time is too short. Will Mother allow this type of frequency? We should at least wait until the last one returns here once again. Do not ask, do not speak. This is Mother's will. Only comply to it. Immediately afterwards, he felt everything around him started shaking all of a sudden. Boom. Pang. A sound, as if something had shattered, traveled into his ears. He seemed to have heard a clear sound of something being smashed. The next moment, he inhaled smoothly amid the invisible pressure and darkness, like he had just floated to the surface of water. It was not only just one breath of air. It was a surge of power. A power that surpassed any mortal. He, Thales Jadestar, finally remembered who he was. His senses returned to him at the same time. The pores on his entire body seemed to have opened in an instant as they greedily received information from the outside world. His sluggish joints were no longer rubbing against each other, just like they were lubricated by a surge of power. The blood that gathered on his skin seemed to have received the order to return back to his blood vessels and provide him with the nutrients necessary for him to continue living. The heart that had been beating too fast due to lack of oxygen returned to its slower, rhythmical throbbing. Only, it was stronger and more powerful than before. Thales felt it. A surge of power began its journey from an unknown corner of his body and rapidly ascended to fill his entire being in an instant. The pain in his throat slowly disappeared. He even felt the various internal injuries in him slowly recovering. Soon, Thales felt the coldness beneath his body, the fierce wind around him, and Serena's familiar laughter. Like a drowned person who was brought back to life once again, Thales opened his eyes swiftly. Immediately afterwards, he stared into the sky, still trembling. He opened his mouth wide and sucked in a breath of air that he had not taken for a long time, as though it had been years before he last breathed. Phew! Everything was the same as before. He had come back to life. Chapter 92, Sin of Hell's River. Atop the snow-covered ground beneath the moonlight, Serena was laughing hysterically as she lifted her transformed, sharp claws. She was staring at Ralph, who was struggling with all his might under the halting gaze. She shook her head lightly and said, "Perhaps, if you had never seen this, you would not have to die. After all, I need sufficient eyewitnesses from both sides to spread the word about everything that happened here today." However, since those of the Blood Clan had an extraordinary sense of hearing, a shudder suddenly went through the complacent Serena's body. Cough, you want to spread word? Word from the person involved may be even more convincing than an eyewitness, cough. Serena Corleone turned around in disbelief. No way. Under the lunar light, a voice that was extremely familiar to both people rose up from the vacant snowy ground. Is it not? Say, ugly-faced woman? With shock filling both Ralph and Serena, the supposedly dead Thales coughed violently. He was panting as he flipped over and climbed up from the ground. His hands were still tied behind his back. There is a bardic poem that you do not understand, which has a line that is sung like this. Thales stood up with much difficulty while he immediately thought about the situation and solution before him, slowly saying, "What does not kill you makes you stronger, stand a little taller." During the few seconds that Serena averted her gaze, Ralph struggled free from his rigid state. It felt like finally being freed from a bound state. But both of them did not do anything else. With their eyes wide opened, they were only staring in shock at Thales, who was speaking. How is it possible? Serena shook her head with a surprised look on her face. She dipped her head down and looked at the hand that she had strangled Thales with. Did I spend too much time in the prison, to the extent that my estimation of my own power deteriorated? But, he was truly not breathing anymore. What is going on? There must be a problem. Ralph looked at Thales and gave a relieved smile as he made a hand sign. Do not, look, her eyes. Thales returned Ralph's gaze and lightly nodded. The Blood Clanswoman with silver hair and red eyes clenched her teeth. She turned around and stared furiously at Thales. Damn it! Thales gave her a smile which had been absent on his face for a long time. He purposely avoided Serena's gaze, not giving her a chance to activate her power. The second prince clenched the top and bottom row of his teeth together and put the tip of his tongue in between the rows of his teeth. He was probably too nervous and terrified earlier, which was why he did not think about biting the tip of his tongue. Thales smiled bitterly from the bottom of his heart. Even though I was forced to watch the journey so many times. The first target, Dark Knight Black Coffin. Do I really want to let that mystic out? A strange expression flashed before his eyes. But Thales only hesitated for a second before he was ready to start. However, just as Thales was ready to bite the tip of his tongue to activate the forbidden ability, some strange changes occurred in his body. Weird fluctuations surged up his heart and bubbled up to his chest, neck, face, and finally his eyes. His blurred vision became clear and bright. He could fully capture everything in an instant, whether they were big or small objects. Serena became clearer before his eyes. Thales was momentarily stunned. What is this? He could feel Serena as if she was a blood-red beacon, emitting glaring red light in the boundless darkness. He turned his head around and saw Katerina lying unconscious on the ground beneath a big tree to his left. She was breathing heavily despite being unconscious, and her entire frame was glimmering with a dim, waning white light. Is there a problem with my eyesight? Thales blinked his eyes in confusion as he stared at the scene before him. But to his surprise, he discovered that everything in the world seemed to slow down. It had actually taken Serena a full 5 seconds to complete the act of clenching her teeth. Damn it. Her voice became incomparably slow and deep, as if it was caused by a tape recorder having its speed adjusted. That's not right. This is a series of plays based on time stop. I mean, time has become slower? No. Thales felt that his own movements had also become slower. It is only my train of thought that has become faster. He narrowed his eyes as he wanted to see a little clearer. The fluctuations rushed up to his brain, and the scene before his eyes changed once again. That moment, Thales could even see something that resembled radiation clearly with his eyes. The blood in Serena's body was moving around vigorously. It filled her heart, chest, both of her arms, and also the wings that were furled behind her. He could see Serena's muscles contracting and relaxing with great force, but the fluctuations of her aura within her body moved in sections, as if her body was full of empty spaces in between. It gave off a disconnected feeling, like some part of it was damaged. It seemed as though he had gotten control of Serena's claws, arms, legs, torso, and every mobile as well as immobile part of her body, her center of gravity, strength, speed, and movements, all in an instant. He could understand everything clearly in his heart. What is going on? Thales thought in panic. Thales turned around and stared at the black coffin. This unique anti-mystic equipment was visibly radiating a deep black energy and black light. Strange fluctuations of different colors were also surging out continuously. It made it appear like a very ill omen. If I use mystic energy to open it, then what is inside? His heart skipped a beat. Are there any better methods to settle this predicament before my eyes? Thales was just done thinking when the fluctuations disappeared from his field of vision. It was as if they possessed consciousness. Everything before his eyes went back to normal. This is... Thales furrowed his brows together. What kind of power is this? Damned little shit. Serena resumed her normal talking speed as she spoke with her teeth tightly clenched together. Alright, this time I will chop off your head. But after a few seconds, the fluctuations appeared again. This time, it rushed straight up to his brain. Wait a minute. A shudder went through Thales' body. Some sort of amplification method seemed to have been activated during that instant in his brain, which had been obvious since the start. A better method. The distance of the black coffin, Serena's speed, a true form transformation, the possible direction of attack, Ralph's best route to provide him aid and protection, the limits that would be placed on his speed due to the snow-covered ground, everything before his eyes became usable information that was systematically and rapidly stored into his brain. Possible plans, expected risks, influential factors, estimations of success rate. This time, the fluctuation seemed to consume more energy than the previous few times. It remained in his mind for a while before it disappeared from his brain. Thales felt like he had just run 1,000 meters in an instant. He was shaking and drenched in cold sweat. Am I something out of a sci-fi novel or am I an eradicator? However, he just suddenly knew how to settle the situation before him. He also knew what method would bring him the least side effects and the least amount of failure. Maybe, he did not have to use that power after all. He had a better method. Thales cautiously avoided meeting Serena's gaze as he calmed his breathing. Meanwhile, he walked to the spot between Ralph and Serena, and put on a smile. You know, I really want to call you a whore, Thales said insipidly with his hands behind his back. Foolish mortal, Serena frowned and thought to herself, are you really that confident to be this near to me? I shall kill this little brat first. It would be even better if I can behead him. This is nothing to be afraid of. What I need to take note of is that disabled supra-class member. The Blood clanswoman glanced at Ralph, who was wearing a silver mask. I have to make sure he stays here so that the truth will not be leaked. I have to be quicker. Serena gritted her teeth. Chris and Istrom cannot stall any longer. Oh, then why don't you? Serena's face blossomed into a smile as though she was conjuring tricks. Her swift change made Thales gasp in amazement. Dear Thales? She calculated the distance between herself and Ralph, as well as the time she would take to transform into her true form before pouncing on him. Ralph furrowed his eyebrows. He saw Thales' hands, which were tied together behind him. They were rapidly moving. Even though Thales was not using his head and his chest as well to form his messages, Ralph still recognized what Thales was trying to convey. Push, me, left, tree, he repeated it twice. Ralph narrowed his eyes. It was such a familiar feeling. It was the same feeling he felt the last time they were in the dungeon. Because, if I call you a whore, I am afraid I would have insulted this divine profession, Thales replied flatly. Serena chuckled softly and exercised her claws. So a whore is a divine profession in your mind? Thales exhaled and enunciated each word clearly under Serena's astonished gaze, but I still have to thank you. At least before you killed me, you told me the truth. My blood is indeed very nutritious. The next second, Thales gestured with his hands behind his back. Begin. Ralph's pupils trembled before Serena could even react. His psionic ability was activated in an instant. A gust of fierce wind rose from nowhere and attacked swiftly. Woo! But it did not attack Serena, who was completely on guard. Instead, it swept Thales up and blew him towards the sky. Thales clenched his teeth tightly and barely managed to support his whole body. He squinted his eyes to resist the impact of the wind. After all, he was not human kite Ralph, who had immersed himself in this path for many years. Time once again seemed to slow down when he was up in the air, but he knew this was not the case. Those fluctuations gradually filled all four of his limbs. Thales immediately felt his limbs turning gently, allowing him to maintain his balance in the wind. Serena hissed sharply as she transformed into her scary true form within his peripheral vision. Where are you going to run to? Serena widened her eyes, which resembled the black hole, and unfolded her red skeletal wings. They tore her cape apart. She flapped her wings and flew up in the air as she roared in her hoarse voice, "Mortal brat!" However, Ralph's gaze was full of determination as he stepped upon the fierce winds to pounce on the Blood clanswoman. He had to hold this monster back. This was the boy's plan. Thales flew down towards the big tree on his left. It was the birch tree that was broken during the sisters' fight earlier. A figure was lying unconsciously on the ground beside the tree. Serena's expression immediately changed when she realized what Thales was going to do. But at the next moment, the sound of the wind howled behind the patricide. Serena instinctively turned around and attacked with her claws. Clang! It was a fierce sound of metal clashing against each other. Ralph was technically not the one who attacked. It was the piece of steel rope in Ralph's hand. Taken by surprise, Serena furrowed her brows. Her arms were tightly bound by the steel rope in the surprise attack. Arg! Serena yelled frantically as she was dragged backwards by the steel rope, which was controlled by the fierce wind. She tried to tear the steel rope apart, but her efforts were to no avail as sparks flew in all directions. On the other end of the rope was Ralph, and he was flying in the air with clenched teeth. The steel prosthetics made of two coarse metal plates below his knees had already disappeared without a trace. That piece of steel rope was a tool used by Ralph to fasten his prosthetics in place, so it was incomparably tough and durable. I will never let you go over there, the Phantom Wind follower's gaze was resolute. Thales landed on the snowy ground on his bound hands. He then rolled forward twice in a disheveled state. The fluctuations had dissipated. A sense of exhaustion came over him. His entire body was sore, some joints were even aching due to laceration. Thales vaguely understood that this was because his current physical condition was completely unable to keep up with the act of balancing himself on the wind just now. However, he was still struggling with his hands behind of his back as he squirmed and crawled towards that person. She was the critical point of his plan. Katerina Corleone. The dying Night Queen. Dawn. Thales knocked his head against Katerina's beautiful face. The collision slightly roused the latter up from her coma. He stared at Katerina's unfocused gaze and spat out two words. Bite me. The seriously injured Katerina, whose 4 limbs were broken, and who only had her torso left, brought her head up in much difficulty. She glanced at him, her gaze revealing her confusion. The prince could be heard saying coldly, "Suck my blood." But the Night Queen, who had lost her confidence, only glanced at the situation on the field before she shook her head weakly and in anguish. It is no use. My injuries are too severe. You should quickly leave. Maybe you can escape from this. Katerina lowered her head in resignation and closed her purple eyes. On the other side, Ralph was still using his steel rope to deal with Serena strenuously while maintaining his distance from her. Thales furrowed his eyebrows tightly together. This woman. I cannot believe it. She is a queen? Right at this moment, Ralph's painful grunt could be heard from afar. There was no time to waste anymore. Thales made a decision. The prince, who had his hands tied behind his back, licked his lips with his tongue and furrowed his brows. Did Serena not say that my blood is more nutritious? At the next moment, Thales closed his eyes, closed his teeth around the tip of his tongue, and forcefully slammed his chin onto the snow-covered ground. He heard a soft plop. Then, he felt an excruciating pain coming from the tip of his tongue. It was so painful that Thales had tears flowing out from his eyes. The feeling of biting down onto my own tongue, it's so painful. But Thales still struggled to stand up while tears of pain flowed down his cheeks. Without a sign of hesitation, he threw himself to Katerina's side without turning back. Then, under the master of the Corleone family, the Weeper, the Night Queen, Katerina van Corleone's astonished gaze, Thales intentionally kissed Katerina on the mouth. Katerina instinctively wanted to break free. Thales pushed his bloody tongue into her mouth with his eyes wide open in anger. 1 second passed. Katerina's whole frame trembled. This is the taste of this blood. Woo woo. Ralph's unclear grunts traveled into his ears once again. Thales furrowed his eyebrows and stared straight into Katerina's disbelieving stare. This woman, why does she not play by the rules? Her older sister, Serena, was obviously excited and intoxicated while she savored the taste. She had an excited expression on her face. Could it be that she does not like? But he did not finish his thought. Because the next moment, Katerina was struggling with her disabled body, revealing her scary, bloodthirsty gaze. The purple-eyed blood clanswoman, who only had her torso intact, abruptly flipped over and pinned the 7-year-old child underneath her. Thud. The Night Queen moved forward in a crazed and wild manner. She bit down onto Thales' lips tightly. And frantically sucked on his blood. Pain. Thales felt excruciating pain coming from his tongue. Thales once again had tears flowing out of his eyes because of the pain. Woo woo. He shook his head forcefully and desperately, forcing Katerina to release his mouth. Tears were flowing down Thales' cheeks as he was panting violently. I was wrong. She is absolutely crazier than her older sister. Thales lifted his head, furrowing his eyebrows as he looked at Katerina, who was pressing onto him. She had a furious expression on her face because she was interrupted during her feasting. The next second, Thales anxiously stretched out his head to reveal the skin on his neck like he was an anxious lover. He recklessly said to Katerina, "Quick, neck. Be quick." A yearning look appeared in Katerina's eyes. She lowered her head fiercely and tore apart the collar on Thales' shoulder with her teeth. Hey! You! Before Thales could finish speaking, Katerina had already bared her fangs and bit into his throat savagely. She started to suck on his blood. The feeling of pain from the sucking, dizziness, numbness, and pleasure all rushed into Thales' heart in an instant. Thales had tears of pain flowing down from his eyes. He looked miserably and pitiably at Katerina, who was violently attacking his body. He then finished his sentence weakly and bitterly. Can you please be gentler? Serena grabbed onto a tree and finally regained her footing amid the fierce wind. Damn worm. You have played for long enough. The next second, she lifted her head ferociously and firmly held onto the steel rope before suddenly pulling on it. She activated her great strength that had been reinforced by her true form. Ralph, who was already exhausted, was swung around by the great force and his movements became sluggish. He was slammed forcefully onto a birch tree beside him and fell powerlessly onto the snow-covered ground. Ralph climbed up with much difficulty, but he could only lean against the birch tree powerlessly without his prosthetics. Ralph used his psionic ability to suck in a breath of cold air once again. He extended both his hands and brought out two hidden blades. He soared into the air once again to face Serena. They were now fighting at close quarters. But just as Ralph went towards her, Serena swung her claws upwards with agility and had them pierce his first hidden blade in an angle that was incredibly difficult to handle. The strength in Ralph's blade vanished entirely. Ding! The hardness of the blade was no match to the steel ropes, and it shattered inch by inch into smaller pieces. Serena's use of her strength was very ingenious. Ralph suddenly paused midair, and he had no choice but to adjust the wind first in order to whittle her strength down. However, just then, Serena extended one of her long legs without any expression on her face and she stepped onto his other arm forcefully. Ralph grunted and flew backwards. His arm seemed to be fractured. Serena had a ferocious look on her face as she increased the speed of her flapping skeletal wings in an instant. She closed in on Ralph extremely fast. She used her sharp claws to attack him rapidly. Clang! She broke Ralph's last hidden blade. I miscalculated, Ralph thought in disappointment. I can't hold her back at all. He recalled what the air mystic said to him a very long time ago. I have also seen quite a number of the Supreme class. Their battle styles are basically the ability to use their strength at will, being meticulous down to the smallest detail, in a manner that is always just right, and not in the least bit sluggish in their movements. Asta slowly said. The battles between Supreme class members seem boring and simple, fast but monotonous. However, this type of detailed and scary control is far from what those super-class brats, who recklessly waste their energy or strength, can ever imagine. As for your question, if you meet a Supreme class. Asta's blue shirt was very vibrant. Ralph could still remember his indifferent and expressionless face till this day. If you do not get near a Supreme class member, you might be able to use your psionic ability to deal with that person for a while. But Asta immediately raised his head and had a pensive look on his face. There is only one exception. If you happen to meet Black Sword. Ralph remembered Asta chuckling at the time. Remember to write your will beforehand. Ralph silently sighed in his heart at his memory of the past. Darn it! As expected, Supreme class and Supraclass are simply not on the same level. I cannot even hold her back for a few minutes. The Phantom Wind follower closed his eyes gently. This is going to end here. At least, I have paid my debt. However, the next moment, a violent sound of the wind along with the sounds of fighting traveled swiftly towards him. Then, the final sound came, rip. Ralph opened his eyes in surprise. Damn it. Serena could be seen holding her left shoulder and flapping her skeletal wings as she shrieked in pain. She was backing away frantically. Until she was a few meters away. A few seconds later, the patricide lifted her head and stared at the person opposite her, filled with hatred. It was that blood clanswoman in her pure white true form. Dear older sister. The elegant beauty, Caterina Corleone, was standing coldly across Serena. All four of her limbs were strong and in perfect condition, her skeletal wings were contracting and expanding with ease. Her purple eyes were icy and sharp. It was as if she had never been injured. The queen held Thales with her left hand, who was moaning and panting in her embrace in a semi-conscious state. Serena was staring ferociously and angrily at her younger sister as she let out an indignant roar. The Night Queen took a step forward and she simply threw the bloody left arm she just tore off onto the snow-covered ground. Her face immediately became stern and serious. Second round. Tower of Eradication, Sharp Blade Valley, Underground Chamber. Shao was stroking his long, white beard as he slowly walked into the room. He lit up the everlasting lamp at the corner of the room. It was a strange, circular room. It was completely void of all objects. It only had thick stone walls. There were different kinds of scratches, all of different lengths on the stone walls. Some of them were deeper and some of them were shallower. It seemed like the walls were scratched out frantically. Shao turned around and stared at the other side of the room. A curled-up figure was trembling non-stop at the corner. Shao stared at the person for a while before he slowly sighed. Is it more serious now? The figure kept on trembling. It took the person a long while before he spoke. It is swallowing me. Shao's expression was serious. Swallow? Do you mean it is corroding your body? The figure was trembling as he lifted his head and gave Shao a broken smile. Not only that. This power, it's as if it is going to come alive in my body. Shao furrowed his brows. What is going on? The figure continued to tremble, as if he had seen his greatest fear. It has its own conscience, like a demon at the bottom of my heart. It keeps urging me, threatening me, frightening me. To fight as if my life depends on it. To battle. To kill. I cannot stop, cannot stop. Until I meet my death, or death rejects me once again, I cannot stop. Shao closed his eyes and kept quiet for a long time. His eyes were surrounded by a red rim when he reopened them. Xiao, a Far Eastern scion of the Tower of Eradication with a virtuous and respectable name, slowly sat down with his legs crossed next to the figure. His eyes were filled with grief. Maybe this plan is absolutely wrong. Even a genius like Crassus can only, how is it possible for us to? Xiao's speech was grave and filled with pain. Both of you, I should not have let you go that time. But the figure only laughed coldly. Impossible. Horus and I, let us not consider the possibility of him surviving. He fought so many battles after that, and killed so many people. If Horus had been the one to go at that time, can you imagine what he would be like right now? That figure curled up even tighter. Xiao held onto his sword tightly, his heart was filled with regret and pain. After a long while, he sighed. The figure saw Xiao's demeanor and he did his best to give Xiao a smile. Teacher, do not worry. I can still hold on until I finish my mission, I can do this. Xiao's expression was bitter when he reached his hand out and placed it on the figure's shoulder. He said with an aching heart, you have suffered, child. For these past 30 years, you have had to bear the sin that should not exist in the human world. Chapter 93, Don't do it, it'll hurt. When Thales came to from the fatigue of having lost too much blood and the loss of consciousness, he realized that he was leaning against a huge birch tree. Ralph was guarding him closely. Seeing that he woke up, the phantom wind follower heaved a sigh of relief. Thales touched the two fong bites on his neck that had magically closed up and stopped bleeding, and asked feebly, how is the situation? Very good. Ralph gestured with effort. With Ralph's assistance, he tried his best to sit up. He looked towards the two gigantic, terrifying monsters who were basked under the moonlight not far away. One was red and the other was white. Serena dejectedly furled her skeletal wings behind her back. Covered in wounds, she supported herself with a birch tree and cut a pathetic figure as she spat out a mouthful of blood. She panted vigorously. She, who at some point had the absolute advantage, raised her head with effort and glared at her prideful and elegant younger sister in front of her. The true form Katerina only had a few scratches on her body. It seems that the winner has already been determined, patricidal criminal, the Night Queen said coldly and raised the pure white, sharp claws on her right hand. Are you going to surrender, or should I finish you off on the spot? Serena tried her best to support her body. She gritted her teeth and shut her eyes tight. In the second round of the deathly battle, Serena was badly wounded and she had already played all her cards. She was facing Katerina, who recovered in the blink of an eye, was flourishing with vitality, and was even better than before. Apart from having her left arm which had been cruelly torn out from the back, Serena's right lower thigh was also broken off. As one of the effects of Katerina's tears of the bloody night, she could not even maintain her balance to stand on the floor. One of her skeletal wings was torn into three and her body was covered in layers of lacerations. Two of the claws on Serena's remaining right hand were also broken. A bloody and gruesome wound crept downwards from her ugly face to her chest. Serena suppressed the dizziness from the heavy injury and watched everything in front of her in a daze. Have I failed? Racking my brains to make this plan, exhausting every bit of my intelligence for this scheme. Borrowing the power of Constellation to clear out the opposers in the Sacred Blood Army. Ambushing and counterattacking Katerina with Constellation's power, or at least to get rid of the assistants beside her and be able to hide and protect myself, even in the worst situations. These aims. Serena looked in despair at the weakened boy not far away. Who would have thought that not even one was achieved? Why is freedom so hard? Serena lowered her head and sighed. Her gaze dimmed. Her body was becoming unable to support her true form, which consumed a large amount of energy. Her blood and tissue automatically withered and changed, and her body shrunk. From the ugly-faced woman, she changed back into the enchanting Serena. Katerina narrowed her eyes, lightly scratching a birch tree beside her with her claws, leaving deep marks. Very well, if you have one virtue left, older sister, it would be that you could always catch the right time to surrender to protect your life. The naked Serena, who had changed back into her human form, let out a cold and feeble laugh. She said in an unyielding manner, of course, the older sister always cherishes the younger sister. At this moment, both Serena and Katerina's ears moved simultaneously. Swoof! From the birch tree forest nearby came the sound of something skittering rapidly. In the next moment, the old butler Chris Corleone's figure appeared before Katerina. Boom! After a scuffle with the surprised Katerina, Chris retreated to Serena's side in the blink of an eye, took out the cape he had prepared beforehand, and draped it on Serena. The luxurious clothing on his body was tattered. Part of it burst open when he changed into his true form. Another part was the outcome of his intense fight with Hestad. Your Highness, it only took a glance for Chris Corleone to understand the current situation. He spoke with a grim expression. I strongly suggest that we retreat for now. Thales furrowed his brows. He recalled Gilbert's appraisal of this old blood clansman. The Night Queen showed a complicated expression. Chris Corleone, your battle achievements were enough for you to be conferred a Marquisate. I still remember the surprise in Father's eyes when you said that you wanted to serve us as a butler. Seeing it now, it was he who trusted his old subordinate too much. Katerina raised her pure white and strange true form head, furrowing her brows slightly. Where is Hestad? His wish was fulfilled, Your Highness. Chris turned his body. Politely, he bowed slightly to his family's second young mistress, the true mistress of the Corleone family. Hestad had proudly and happily died in battle. He left without any regrets and has been freed from the pain of living forever. Leaving behind only us, his old battle companions, to continue to suffer in this fraudulent world. Chris sighed in his heart. Hearing the news of her subordinate's death, Katerina roared ferociously and flapped open her skeletal wings again. At this moment, a sound came from a thicket. Swoof! 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 One after another, more than 10 figures appeared behind Katerina, as if they were caught in a frame skip. The warriors of the Sacred Blood Army finally arrived, belatedly. Supporting the pale Serena, Chris observed the worsening situation with a grim and serious look. Your Majesty. There were 12 male and female warriors remaining in the Sacred Blood Army. Although all of them bore injuries of varying degrees, their faces were firm and determined. They saluted the Night Queen respectfully. Katerina did not even look at them. She only nodded slowly. Besiege the traitors, she ordered indifferently. At that moment, she appeared, once more, as the character she was supposed to be, the lonely, arrogant and mysterious Night Queen who gained her awe-inspiring reputation by crusading through the Eastern Peninsula for 200 years. The 12 figures scattered in the blink of an eye and surrounded Serena and Chris tightly. Even though none of them spared even a glance at Thales and Ralph, seeing their appearances, Thales' heart tightened. This is the Sacred Blood Army. After such an intense battle, they did not suffer many casualties. Be prepared at all times, and act as the occasion demands, Thales panted feebly as he spoke seriously to Ralph. Both sides have very deep enmity towards us. Don't let your guard down. Ralph nodded. Thales began to worry about the other people again. There are so few casualties in the Sacred Blood Army. I wonder how Poutre, Wyatt, Cora, and Jadestar family's private soldiers are faring. Have I left someone out? How strange, who on earth did I leave out? Thales strenuously and worriedly scratched his head, wanting to remember the person he forgot. But soon, he did not have to be worried anymore. Aha, there you are, brat. A casual greeting called from behind him. Thales sighed. Oh, right, her. Thales' female protector on this journey, Ida, dragged Simon Corleone, who was barely alive and was powerless to resist her, with one hand. Like a donkey pulling a mill, she walked laboriously out of the thicket and immediately attracted everyone's attention. I didn't expect that you would still be alive. Ida said excitedly. Thales rolled his eyes and turned his head. But together with Ralph, he was then stunned. What? Ida had an elegant and beautiful face, silver eyes, bright hair, and sharp ears that swayed slightly as she casually threw Simon down. As if freed from a burden, she exhaled. She turned and clapped, speaking airily and scornfully to Thales, who had a surprised expression and was at a loss for words. Have you never seen an elf? Or is it that you have never seen an elf who is stylishly beautiful and has such a handsome disposition like me? I reckon that with their sense of smell and hearing, those blood clansmen had already found His Highness. White Queso chopped off the tree branch above his head and pressed down on his newly bandaged left rib. Watching the birch tree forest in the dark of night, where nothing could be seen, he laboriously said, and we are still walking around like headless flies. Rather than spending time grumbling, Poutre lit a torch and carefully observed the footsteps and wheel marks on the snow-covered ground. Indifferently, he said, why don't you save your physical strength? You might need to use your sword later. If you are still able to swing it, that is. Behind him was a private soldier from the Jadestar family whom they had met along the way because he broke off from his group. The soldier was supporting Cora, who had almost lost consciousness. Damn it, I lost His Highness on the very first time I escorted him. Feeling the condition of his injury, Waya sighed in remorse. I am probably the worst attendant to the prince in Constellation's history. Hearing this, Poutre's hand, which held a torch, suddenly trembled slightly. No, the vice-diplomat of the diplomat group, Lord Poutre naming, said slowly, you are not. Waya turned his head and stared at Poutre in surprise. The vice-diplomat, who had always hidden his feelings in front of others, showed desolation and grief, which was a strange behavior for him. Trust me, you are not the worst attendant. There was once an attendant to the prince, who was much worse than you. You could say that he was a total failure. Who? Waya asked in a daze, which attendant? Poutre shut his eyes dejectedly, and only shook his head. At this moment, Waya's expression changed. He immediately turned his body. In a flash, the attendant unsheathed the single-edged sword in his hand and swung it in a diagonal angle behind himself. Clink. Pressing on his right shoulder, which had been heavily wounded, in the blink of an eye, Poutre fell onto the ground and could not stop panting. His wound had been inflicted by sharp claws. It was only a few inches away from his throat. On the other hand, Cora fell powerlessly onto the ground. The Jadestar family's private soldier beside Cora fell to his knees in disbelief. Holding his neck, which had been sliced open, he struggled to breathe in his last mouthful of air. Damn it! Waya's movements just now affected his wound, which was already quite serious to begin with. Gritting his teeth and enduring the pain, he put one hand on the ground for support and raised his head to look at the enemy who had suddenly appeared. Excellent intuition, brat. The superclass blood clansman, the blonde and handsome Estrone Corleone, who possessed extraordinary speed, stood before them. He licked his sharp claws that were covered in fresh blood. Estrone took a step forward. His eyes shone with a cold glare. Will it be even more delicious if taken straight from the source? No. Thales shook his head in resignation, letting go of the astonishment and questions in his heart. It's just that I had never seen such a, conscientious elf. Suddenly, Thales was knocked on his head. Knock. Under Ralph's stunned gaze, Thales touched his head with teary eyes and stared pitiably at Ida. What sort of protector is this? Hey, hey, hey! What is with that expression and reply of yours? Under Thales' teary gaze and all the blood clansman's hostile glares, Ida snorted in dissatisfaction. Without any self-awareness, she kicked the unconscious Simon Corleone who was at her feet. I went through countless hardships, used all my might and employed all possible tactics to capture this terrifying supreme-class opponent alive, and then, I cleverly brought him here to serve as a hostage so that you have more bargaining chips while negotiating. It's even harder to capture him alive than to kill him. It took me a long time. Yup, that's right, it's definitely not because I got lost in the thicket. Ida raised her head proudly. And then, I immediately rushed here to help to rescue you. Thales rolled his eyes in exasperation again, then placed his hand on his forehead before he sighed. Thank you for having rushed over now. I only have one question. Were you a police officer? A what? Ida, who had come to his side, was stunned. Ah, I was saying that. Thales supported his feeble body and sat up properly. Changing his expression, he solemnly said, you came at the right time. To capture the enemy alive, you did very well. Ida lifted the corners of her lips and smiled mischievously. Katerina turned her head and glanced at the dejected Simon on the floor. She then stared at Thales. You want to use him as a bargaining chip? It seems that you still do not trust us. Without a crack in his facade, Thales stared right back at the Night Queen. Of course. You are after all, Serena's younger sister. Enough. Katerina turned her head with a chilly expression, deciding to solve the matter within her own family first. She cried out, Serena Corleone, Chris Corleone, surrender yourselves. I will guarantee both of you a fair trial based on our tradition. Looking at the Blood Clan warriors that surrounded them, and at Ida who was a distance away, Chris sighed. He prepared to change into his true form and launch a desperate attack. But at that moment, Serena suddenly extended her hand and stopped her subordinate. Do you think that this is the end? Serena smiled wanly and looked at her younger sister who had the odds in her favor. Katerina furrowed her brows. At this stage, what card does she still have? Thales suddenly recalled the words Serena said, war will wipe out the opposers in the Sacred Blood Army, and provide me with a more submissive Night Kingdom, and the true heir of Corleone would make vigorous efforts to save the situation at the last moment. Wait. Last moment, make vigorous efforts to save the situation? A chill ran down his spine. There are only 3 of them. How are they going to make vigorous efforts to save the situation when they are attacked by the suzerains of Constellation? Thales furrowed his brows. So, these words meant that she has external assistance? In the next moment, a desolate expression appeared on Serena's face. She opened her mouth wide and spat a round, blood-red ball from her throat into her hands. It was a strange, round ball that wriggled ceaselessly by itself. Beside her, Chris' expression changed suddenly. Bewilderment appeared on Katerina's face, she did not recognize that thing. Thales' heart jolted. That strange fluctuation surged into his eyes. That round ball is emitting a blood-red light. Why is this light's texture somewhat familiar? Thales' heart shuddered. He turned towards the black coffin which was a distance away. Was it the light from the legendary anti-mystic equipment? Could it be that the red ball is also? What is it? Katerina asked mockingly, do you still want to battle until you are down to the last soldier? Serena ignored her, she was pale-stricken. Under everyone's gaze, as if resigned to fate, she crushed the wriggling, red ball in her hand. Red liquid flowed out of the crushed ball in Serena's hand, like blood. In a raspy voice, Serena spoke desolately, this is because you all forced my hand. At first, nothing happened at all, but after a few seconds, a thunderous noise rang from a distance away. Boom! Like a deluge charging towards the area. Swoof! The noise was approaching. It came from the eastern direction. Everyone's expression changed. What have you done? Katerina's expression was dark. She looked at Serena, who had a desolate expression. Serena laughed wanly and bitterly. I made my last and most necessary choice. The thunderous noise became increasingly louder and nearer. Everyone cautiously turned their heads around and observed their surroundings. However, there was nothing around the birch tree forest that was basked in moonlight. Hey, brat, you're smart, what on earth is this? Ida asked curiously. Thales shook his head solemnly. He had a bad hunch. Boom! That noise, which sounded like a great flood surging towards the skies, became increasingly nearer. It sounded like it was only a few feet away, and it was coming from the eastern direction. However, even the blood clansmen who were known for their acute sense of hearing were staring at each other in astonishment. It was clear that they could not make out anything. Finally, a few seconds later, that noise became increasingly fainter, weaker. By the end, it finally disappeared completely. Everyone stared at each other in bewilderment. No one understood what had just happened. Only Thales looked towards the east in a daze. With the fluctuations in his eyes, he saw something. Behind the birch tree thicket. Very, very bright light that is, blood red in color. Then, under everyone's anxious and skeptical gazes, a rustling sound came from the direction where the strange noise disappeared, in a birch tree thicket in the eastern direction. Rustle! It was as though someone was walking on the snow-covered ground. The steps were light and flighty, as though the person was not very used to walking on snow. Is that a normal person? A member of the populace? Katerina furrowed her brows. Serena flashed a broken smile. Eventually, a thin and frail figure appeared in everyone's vision. The owner of those footsteps was a maiden. A maiden who was full of smiles. She walked slowly out from behind a birch tree. Seeing her, the heavily injured Serena Corleone started trembling uncontrollably. Everyone else put on surprised, bewildered expressions, and stared at each other. There is only one person? Who is she? The maiden quickly ran her gaze across the scene and said in a gentle voice, "Oh, so it's here?" On the other hand, Katerina furrowed her brows tightly. Who is she? Is she Serena's reinforcement? A delicate and weak girl? No. It's better to be more careful. After all, she is part of Serena's last resort. Katerina rapidly weighed the situation. The maiden flashed a smile that was enchanting, bright, cute and good-natured. However, Thales instinctively felt a wave of unprecedented danger. Can I have that box? This was a promise made a long time ago. Smiling, the maiden pointed at something a distance away. Thales moved his head. His face turned pale. The maiden was pointing at the dark night black coffin. Katerina's expression was solemn. She cautiously took a step forward. No matter who you are, the queen steadily said, I advise that you do not meddle with the matter here. The expressions of the warriors of the Sacred Blood Army were freezing cold as they watched the reckless maiden. With Katerina's message delivered to them via telepathy, some of them nodded. 5 of the Blood Clan warriors disappeared in the blink of an eye and blocked off the maiden's path by standing in front of her. They stared at the maiden coldly. What? You all want to say no? The maiden appeared a little surprised. Why are there people like this every time? I will be very troubled. Don't say no. Under everyone's anxious and skeptical gazes and expressions, she then shook her head with a smile, revealing her spotless white teeth. Don't. It will be painful. Thales watched the strange stalemate between the nameless maiden and the blood clansman in front of him in bewilderment. The way she talked, this manner of talking to herself, I think I have heard it before from somewhere. Then, a quaking voice that was mixed with fear rang unsteadily in the air, run. Everyone turned their gazes. The Supreme Class Elite, Simon Corleone, who had just regained consciousness, sat up. Currently, he stared at the maiden with his eyes wide open. There was uncontrollable panic on his face, like a rat who saw a cat. Run! Simon! Katerina could not stand the sight. She sternly yelled, You are losing your composure. The Blood Clan warriors stared at each other in disbelief. They found it hard to believe that their commander was in such a state. But that was not all. Then, the battle-seasoned Supreme Class Elite, the Blood Clan Marquis from the Corleone family, one of the Night King's fearsome 4 wings, the well-renowned Flashwing Simon Corleone, unexpectedly shifted his posterior around on the snow-covered ground like a child. He was cowering and shuddering. No, all of you do not know, all of you do not understand, it is. The maiden looked at Simon gently and flashed a toothy smile. Simon immediately shivered. Trembling under everyone's disbelieving gazes, his handsome face twitched and he vigorously shook his head. Sitting up on the ground, he thrust his legs and moved backwards, as though he saw his darkest nightmare. Almost in tears and with his face distorted, Simon shrieked in a hoarse voice that was both forlorn and fearful, Quick! Run! The chamber. Catch your breath first, then carefully recount the incident. In the darkness, the Black Prophet Morat Hansen held his staff tightly. His expression was unprecedentedly grave. His capable subordinate, Raphael Lindbergh, held the wall and breathed heavily, as if he had just run all the way here. Gasping for breath, he spoke anxiously, because the prince's diplomat group was heading north. The people we assigned at the border of Constellation and Extet, to search for Ramon, were also prepared to return, but both of them did not return. A day ago, somebody discovered one of their corpses. Raphael lowered his body and placed his hands on his knees. Gritting his teeth, he panted, wanting to ease his breathing. And then? Morat asked steadily, how did that person die? The next moment. It. Raphael raised his head. Panting, he said through gritted teeth, it was that. Morat's pupils contracted. He gripped the staff in his hand tightly and listened as Raphael finished saying the phrase. Homicidal maniac. Chapter 94, All the blood in this world belongs to me behind the dark palace's gate. Simon Tori adjusted his heavy chain armor. He gripped onto the pike in his hand tightly, it had been cleaned until it was glossy and shiny. He stood behind his master, his cousin brother, Enrique Tori, who was 17 years older than him. Simon regulated his breathing. There were countless knights and warriors beside and behind him. They stood close to each other behind the palace floodgate. Everyone's expressions were different. Some were so nervous they were trembling, and some had determined gazes, unflinching in the face of death. There were also some who had numb expressions and lax gazes. Quite a number of people were whispering among themselves. Simon could vaguely hear words such as monster and complete annihilation. His cousin brother, Enrique the Knight, nodded at the middle-aged man beside him who wore a purple robe. The latter turned and left. Simon recognized that he was Jerry, the wizard who originated from Soul Tower and was the current wizardry advisor of Sword Lake City. But why is he leaving? Simon thought in puzzlement, Soul Tower has already been destroyed. Where else can he go? Enrique the Knight bestrode his battle steed and pulled up his visor. He glanced worriedly at Simon. The latter tried his best to stand even straighter. I am, after all, a knight attendant. The nervous Simon thought. I must not be a disgrace in the first battle I serve my cousin brother. Enrique did not look at his cousin brother anymore. Instead, he raised his head with a resolute expression. He turned the head of his horse and looked towards the dense mass of knights and soldiers before him. They are right outside the gate. He spoke in a loud voice, those disgraceful followers, Redalians, Nedenises, Caluntians, Northlanders, Far Easterners. There might also be other damned races of various colors and shapes. Many kinds of them. But I do not care. Enrique's determined eyes swept past every single person, then unsheathed the longsword on his saddle and roared loudly with every ounce of his strength, because they all share one similarity. They will not live for long. Almost all the knights and warriors raised their weapons. Some knocked their weapons and shields against each other, and some raised theirs high into the air. Amid the metallic clanking sounds and the sea of pikes and blades, every single person who followed their respective commanders instinctively let out a furious roar, "Whoa!" Simon was also among them, shouting especially loudly at the top of his lungs. This gave him a lot of confidence to enter the battlefield for the first time. The Northlanders' victory proved that they, those monsters, those calamities, are not invincible. Enrique exclaimed, and what we are facing are only the remnants of their army. Many of them gripped their weapons tightly. We will squash them to pieces. Woo-ah! Open the city gates. Enrique ordered loudly. The soldiers on top of the city gates turned the reel. The castle gates began to rise. The commander of these vanguards, Enrique the Knight, rode to the very front. Simon quickly followed suit with his pike in hand. After the gate is opened, no matter what you see, you must remember. Commander Enrique raised the iron-colored longsword that he inherited from the Temple of Knights. His powerful voice traveled to every single warrior's ears. We are the sons and daughters of Sorinlon, the warriors of the Land of Thorns, and the protectors of the southwestern land. Woo-ah! Better to bleed for freedom than to submit in fear. The brilliant rays of the Republic once shone on our ancestors' bodies, and not even the powerful Empire could erase it. Woo-ah! Dragons, elves, orcs, or the diabolic Empire, none of them can make us bend our knees. All the children of Thorns were born to revolt. Woo-ah! The brilliant rays of Errol will forever protect Star Lake City. Children of Thorns, advance. Woo-ah! The gate finally rose to the top. Standing beside his cousin brother, Simon looked at the shield on his cousin brother's saddle. It had the pattern of a rapier wrapped in thorns on it. I am from the Tory family. He gripped his pike tightly and looked outside the city gate. There was a murderous, but obviously fatigued and wounded army outside. The army was also smaller than theirs. Is this the supporters and followers of those calamities? Simon shook his head and cleared those distracting thoughts from his mind. We, the Tory family, have guarded Star Lake City for generations. I am a child of Thorns. I never give in. Enrique the Knight put down his longsword. He took the pike from Simon, which the latter was holding tightly in his hand. Stay close to the formation, Simon. A hesitant expression appeared on Enrique's face. Simon's cousin brother struggled internally for a moment before furrowing his brows and speaking to Simon in a low voice, if the battle does not go well. Simon was stunned. There is a secret passage under the southern city gate, in the drain to the left. His cousin brother finished his last sentence. Ha? Secret passage? Before Simon could react, Enrique the Knight raised his pike. His superpower surged into his arm and he spurred the horse into a dash. What did cousin brother mean? Simon unsheathed the sword at his waist. His whole body trembled uncontrollably as he stepped out of the gate with the battalion. He saw that they had moved into their battle formation in a very short time. The knights were in front, the infantrymen at the sides, and the archers at the back. He saw his cousin brother roar furiously. Enrique kicked his horse's belly and its hooves trotted at an increased speed. The knights beside him followed fearlessly. He saw the commander of the infantrymen draw his longsword and raised his shield as a signal for the infantrymen to advance. He saw the archers fire 2 rounds of arrows, bringing down a rain of arrows as they fought against the enemy archers. He raised his shield with all his might, feeling the vibration on it. Many of the people within the infantrymen's battle formation fell under the rain of arrows. He saw the knights roar in synchronization, holding their pikes horizontally and charging forwards in a row. Different kinds of superpowers appeared on the knights. He saw the superpower taught in the Temple of Knights also appear in his cousin brother's hand. Enrique swung his pike and held it horizontally, pointing it towards the enemy. He saw himself raising his longsword high and furiously roaring while advancing with the infantrymen. And then, he saw that right in front of his cousin brother, a person had suddenly appeared. A maiden. His cousin brother raised his pike and thrust it at her without hesitation. Simon Corleone was abruptly jolted out of his thoughts. His head became clear again. The Blood Clan Marquis thoughts returned from being that knight attendant more than 600 years ago, to the reality now, to the birch tree forest that can only be found in the northern territory of Constellation. He stared at the area before him in fear. It was that same maiden. A battle erupted without warning. Attack! Katarina's apathetic order rose into the air. Die! 2 Blood Clan warriors from the Sacred Blood Army appeared, one in front of the other as they flanked the strange maiden. Another warrior ferociously appeared midair and attacked from above her. The maiden softly raised her head and smiled. Simon extended his hand towards the solemn-looking Night Queen Katarina and shouted in panic, "No! Beside him, Thales, the little boy who was around 7 or 8 years old, spoke to the two people beside him in annoyance. Why did they start fighting like this? As he spoke, the 3 warriors from the Sacred Blood Army had already extended their claws, which were comparable to military weapons made of steel, mercilessly. Katerina furrowed her brows tightly and fixated at the maiden, but the maiden was still smiling, not caring about the danger one bit about she faced. She did not even resist. The next moment, the pupils of everyone watching the battle, including Katerina and Thales, narrowed. What is going on? Tear. The blood clansman in front pierced through the maiden's chest with his claws and dug out a bloody heart. Swooh. The blood clansman at the back cleaved the maiden in half at her waist, and she still gave no response. Tear. The blood clansman on top grabbed and twisted her head, pulling out the maiden's head from her thin and frail neck while she was alive and dragging out a segment of her spine. Blood surged out from her arteries like a fountain. Under the cruel and bloody attack, the maiden's body was immediately snapped into 3. Blood splattered everywhere. Resisting the urge to vomit, Thales furrowed his brows slightly. He saw that Serena still had a despaired expression, but beside her, Chris Corleone had his brows tightly furrowed. In the blink of an eye, the 3 Blood Clan warriors had killed the enemy. It was surprisingly easy, causing them to stare at each other in puzzlement. However, they still respectfully returned to the queen's side and scrupulously handed over the maiden's head. Looking at the maiden's head and the smile she showed on her face before she died, Katerina let out a low-pitched roar. Just like this? This is way too easy. Is this Serena's reinforcement? Only the besieged Serena had a dull gaze and was laughing strangely. Everyone could feel the bizarre undertone in the situation. At this moment, Ida opened her eyes wide and shouted, "Something's not right." Those who had been skeptical from the start immediately looked towards the maiden's corpse on the floor. However, there were no changes at all to the 2 sections of the headless, mutilated corpse. In the next moment, the situation of the scene changed abruptly. Ah! A few miserable screams of pain cried out suddenly. The ones who screamed were the 3 Blood Clan warriors who were involved in the maiden's slaughter. All 3 of them had their hands pressed against their chests and stomachs, and their bodies bent over in pain. One of them even fell onto the ground. "Your Majesty!" He scratched at his chest and stomach, and his face was twisted as though he was going through the most dreadful torment in the world. Katerina watched in shock and fury at the miserable state of her 3 subordinates. Was it poison? Thales lifted his head, and the fluctuation surged into his eyes. Immediately after that, he opened his mouth wide in surprise. A blood-red light that was more dazzling than anyone else's radiated from within the 3 blood clansmen's body. Katerina was about to check her subordinate's condition when a figure, faster than the speed of light, immediately appeared beside her in a flash. Before Katerina could react, the figure dragged her back. "No, Your Majesty." Simon, having changed into his true form, forcefully dragged the furious Katerina away. He shook his head in agitation. "We must retreat." No, so hot, something, there's something." The miserable screams of the 3 Blood Clan warriors became more and more terrifying. 2 of their anxious comrade-in-arms appeared beside them and examined them keenly. Through the peculiar vision brought on by the strange fluctuations, Thales watched the scene in shock. "No matter what that trick is," he said anxiously to Ida and Ralph, "I think we should leave first," but before he could finish speaking, boom. A massive, thunderous boom suddenly surged into the sky. Thales instinctively shut his eyes and covered his ears. Everyone watched the scene with their eyes wide and mouths agape as the 3 elite warriors from the Sacred Blood Army exploded like bursting balloons. They were blasted into countless pieces of severed limbs and flesh. There were also thousands of red blood droplets splattering in all directions. The 2 comrade-in-arms nearby were affected by the blast. They fell on the ground powerlessly. After convulsing for a while, they too began screaming miserably. "Damn it!" Katerina shrugged Simon off as she roared furiously. But immediately afterwards, something even more bizarre happened. The blood and severed limbs that littered the ground were actually moving like they had a life of their own. They gathered towards one place. The blood that was all over the ground flowed joyfully and coalesced into a blood-red ball. Thales furrowed his brows. He swore he had just seen the most disgusting scene in his entire life. A severed hand that belonged to a blood clansman crawled nimbly by dragging itself on the ground using its fingers. It crawled nearer towards that blood-red ball, then the 5 fingers leapt with all their might and jumped into that blood ball. The severed hand was not the only thing that could move by itself. Calves tumbled about, lips opened and closed while advancing towards that ball of blood, livers moved while expanding and contracting, organs moved about with overflowing vitality, eyeballs bounced about, brains rolled forward strenuously, and spinal cords wriggled forward like snakes. They were all like slaves, summoned by their masters, joyfully coalescing into that red blood ball. Boom! The 2 blood clansmen who were screaming miserably while lying on the ground also exploded into bloody limb fragments that scattered in all directions. Their blood and severed limbs also came alive in the blink of an eye and coalesced into the massive ball that had expanded to the height of a person. Katerina watched everything unfolding before her eyes in shock. This surpassed her understanding of the world. The blood clansmen looked at each other for help in panic. Simon fixated on the ball, recalling the most unbearable and terrifying memory in his mind. "You disgusting wench! What have you done?" the queen roared frenziedly at Serena. However, Serena only laughed drearily. "As long as we all die here, we will be freed from his curse." Beside her, Chris sighed. Thales felt a strong desire to throw up, so he covered his mouth. "What the hell is that?" Thales pointed at the ball and the severed limbs that were joyfully leaping around the area. He stared at the strange scene before his eyes in disbelief and spoke with a stammer. I don't know. Ida watched in a daze, as though she was struck dumb with terror. But I don't want to die like that. On the other hand, Ralph had a terrified expression. He gestured frantically. Terrifying. At this moment, the ball finally stopped expanding and shriveled slowly. At the same time, a hand suddenly reached out from the ball of blood. It was a person. Everyone watched, stupefied, as that strange, smiling maiden walked out of the ball, naked. Her hair and body were covered in red blood. The maiden shut her eyes, smiled, and said, I told you, it will be painful. Katerina gritted her teeth hard and shouted furiously, What in the world are you? The maiden raised her head. She wiped the area around her eyes, which was covered in blood, revealing her skin and eyes. She looked at Katerina. Aren't you the queen? The maiden smiled as she spoke. What's wrong? Didn't they tell you about it when you were coronated? A puzzled expression appeared on Katerina's face. Ah, you probably did not succeed the throne the normal way. The maiden smiled good-naturedly, but she then shook her head and her smile turned strange. Or, has that bitch, the blood spike, already given up on all of you? At that moment, shock and terror appeared in Katerina's eyes. Thales furrowed his brows. Blood spike. This name again. And this maiden, hopefully she is not who I think she is. Thales gritted his teeth hard and decided to ignore the issues here and make his escape first. At this moment, the maiden stepped forward. Everyone became nervous and instinctively wanted to step back. Only one person went forward in desolation, one step at a time under everyone's gazes. It was Serena. Behind her, Chris showed a hesitant and heartbroken gaze. According to the promise, I have brought you the Dark Knight Black Coffin. Thales watched, surprised and bewildered, as Serena lowered her head with a pale face and knelt, trembling. A steamed blood mystic. At that moment, the whole place became silent. Thales opened his mouth wide and covered his face with his hand. Jinx. He turned towards Ralph. Is that your previous boss? Thales furrowed his brows tightly. However, the latter's face was also deathly pale. He gestured, never seen her. Thales gestured back with an unpleasant expression, all right. Quick, run. Ralph tightened the steel prostheses below his legs and picked Thales up while he maintained his composure. True. The blood mystic flashed a cute smile. A promise that was fulfilled 200 years too late. I deeply apologize, madam, Serena said bitterly, when I took action. So, the blood mystic obviously did not intend to listen to Serena's explanation. She only looked at the black coffin a distance away with a smile. How do I open it? Katerina's expression changed, but Serena did not look at her younger sister. She shut her eyes and said with a look of no longer having any regrets, with the ruler's key, and my blood. Very well. The blood mystic repeated with a pleasant smile. With your blood. The blood mystic extended her hand gently towards Serena and touched her face. Then, agony suddenly appeared on Serena's face. But at that moment, an unexpected figure charged over without hesitation while growling. Ah! Chris Corleone changed into his true form while roaring furiously. He flapped his skeletal wings. Tear. He severed the blood mystic's hand with a slap. And then, under the blood mystic's surprised gaze, Chris turned and pulled Serena, who looked dejected, and threw her over 10 meters away. This is? Serena was shocked. She looked at the old butler from midair. Chris, she muttered. Your Highness. Chris Corleone brutally severed the other hand of the blood mystic with his claws, and shouted furiously, you cannot give up. What was the reason you took this path? Serena trembled and tightly gritted her teeth. Her body fell with a large crash. But then, the blood mystic's severed hand pressed onto Chris' body. The latter immediately roared in pain, ah. He shut his eyes and abruptly knelt down, as if he was being tortured. His skeletal wings convulsed without pause. Immediately, blood-red smoke rose from Chris' whole body. See, your blood is boiling. The blood mystic whom had lost both her arms stopped moving. She looked at him, smiled as she said, your life is on fire. Swoove. In the next moment, Simon Corleone charged at the blood mystic's side with a speed so fast that he could not be seen, wearing an expression showing that he did not fear death. With his hand straight, he sliced off the living blood-colored maiden's head and sent it flying. He turned his head and said, you are so disappointing, old man. Simon gritted his teeth and forced down the terror in his heart. Chris could only relax then. His face was pale and he panted continuously. Haha, he smiled and bitterly said, unexpectedly, you were the one who saved me, Simon. Shut up, old man. Simon's gaze was a mix of fear and hatred as he moved away from the blood mystic's severed body and shot towards Chris. Among the three of you, I hate you the most. Katerina spoke at the same time, have 5 people act as rearguards and cover our retreat. She flew into the air and shouted the order in a frenzy. The rest of you, take the black coffin and retreat immediately. The Sacred Blood Army did not hesitate at all. Among the 7 remaining Blood Clan warriors, 2 of them shot out from their group and dashed towards the black coffin. With one in front and the other at the back, they hoisted up the black coffin. But in the next moment, a head grew out of the chest of the blood-colored maiden's severed body in a bizarre fashion. The head did not grow out of the neck. Instead, it tore through her chest and popped out from between her breasts. Chris and Simon stared at each other. What is this monster? None of you can run away, okay? Amid Chris and Simon's terrified gazes, the head on the chest looked up and smiled happily. If those people find out, I will be very troubled. Not a single one of you can run away, okay? The blood mystic gently took a step forward and raised her only remaining hand. The head on her chest said in a loud voice, all the blood in this world belongs to me. In the next moment, a terrifying rumble came from below the ground. Chris and Simon looked at the ground in surprise and bewilderment, they then stared at each other. What is this? Ralph carried Thales. Along with Ida, the three of them moved stealthily for more than 20 paces. Boom dong! A figure fell from the sky, landing with a loud crash in front of Thales on the snow-covered ground. Thales' expression changed. With great distress on his face, he stared at Serena who fell from the sky. He sighed and said, why is it you again? The heavily wounded Serena supported herself with one hand on a birch tree and got up laboriously. Then, she looked at them with a fierce expression. Did Chris deliberately throw me over here? Did he still think that this boy has any solutions? Serena's eyes suddenly brightened. She remembered something. No wonder Chris wanted me to follow them and leave. Let us make a deal, take me with you, she said coldly, then I will not stop you from leaving. Thales was stunned. Immediately afterwards, anger appeared in his heart. This old witch. However, the blood mystic's chuckles rang faintly from the area. Not a single one of you can run away, okay? A quake came from below the ground. The next moment, Ida roared furiously and pushed Ralph and Thales away, sending them flying. Serena was also thrown off and a flash as shock appeared on her face. Clang! The elf turned and attacked with her machete, chopping a section of a tree root that emerged from the ground. Leave with him first. Ida shouted furiously and turned again to break another section of a tree root that wanted to chase after Thales. However, 1, 2, 3 more tree roots emerged with a loud sound from the ground and swept towards Ida. The elf roared furiously, swinging her blade at the tree roots that were coming from all directions. Ralph and Serena did their best to climb up higher trees. Damn! Thales watched these tree roots in astonishment. What on earth is this power? From the corner of his eyes, he saw Serena following beside them. You brought this rotten mess upon us. Hugging Ralph's neck, Thales spoke fiercely, why do I have to clean it up? But Serena could not reply him in time, because the birch trees beside them came alive. Boom! The birch trees possessed consciousness, and one of them swung its large branch and slammed into them, forcefully sending them back towards their original path. Having no way to avoid it, Ralph's expression changed. He could only summon strong gusts, trying his best to ward off the tree branch. Boom! Behind him, more than 10 tree branches whipped towards them. Ralph's expression changed again. This time, the phantom wind follower summoned every ounce of his strength and threw Thales towards the empty land outside of the forest. Boom! Right after that, Ralph was whipped by the tree branches from all sides, falling towards where Ida was. No! Watching as the snow-covered ground became nearer and nearer, Thales could only shut his eyes. Until an arm wrapped around him and brought him to her bosom. Dawn! Hugging Thales with one hand, Serena fell on the snow-covered ground and rolled twice. Panting, Thales was hoisted up by Serena. Both of them stared at each other and snorted respectively. Having just saved your life, I can, of course, take it back, for the sake of your life. Serena said fiercely, quickly take me away. I know that you definitely have a solution. Like Morat said, your relationship with mystics is shady, bullshit. Thales' mood was also extremely bad. He held on to Serena's neck in a disheveled state, not in the mood to enjoy the softness of her chest at all. He could not help but cut her off with a cuss. You are the one who has a shady relationship with mystics. Your whole family and mystics. However, they came face to face with a group of acquaintances. Ugly-faced woman, how dare you still come back? Katerina, who was in an extremely bad mood, had already changed back into human form. She landed on the ground and spoke furiously, and you, brat, do you want to die? Behind her, 2 blood clansmen who were carrying the black coffin arrived in a flash. I don't want to, either. Thales gritted his teeth. It's all thanks to your good older sister. Boom! The next moment, a few sections of tree roots emerged from beneath the ground. Careful! Thales cried out in surprise. Katerina rapidly flew off in a flash. She watched in shock and fury as the 2 blood clansmen who were carrying the black coffin were tightly entangled by the tree roots. Ah! The 2 blood clansmen entangled by the tree roots immediately let out earth-shattering howls. But it rapidly turned into painful, miserable wails. Thales and Serena flew around in a flash to dodge the roots, while watching in terror as countless miniature root hairs grew out of the tree roots that entangled the 2 blood clansmen, piercing into their skin. The 2 clansmen's blood and flesh shriveled and withered rapidly, changing into the same color as the tree roots. They were then fused with the tree root before burrowing into the ground with the roots. Thales furrowed his brows and shouted, Are you sure she is the blood mystic and not the tree mystic? Compared to the distinct power belonging to Asda, the air mystic whom he had seen before, he did not understand what the blood mystic's ability was at all. Blood, reviving herself, fragments of dead bodies. And now trees, too. My god, what else is she capable of? Thales sighed. He suddenly and sincerely felt that compared to the blood mystic, no matter which aspect he looked at it from, Asda was a good person. Compared to this way of dying, being molded into a human ball of flesh is truly the VIP treatment. Carrying Thales, Serena somersaulted onto the black coffin to dodge the attack from 2 segments of tree roots. I don't know, she said through gritted teeth, it's not like I am a prophet. The tree roots seemed to have a deep fear of the black coffin, not daring to enter its proximity. They only prowled about, as though they were consciously waiting for their prey. Katerina had also skittered onto the black coffin. As the sisters met each other's gazes, hatred and disgust surged into their hearts at the same time. Both of them roared. Cry baby! Ugly-faced woman! The 5 Blood Clan warriors charged forward in a flash. The strangely shaped blood mystic let loose a long string of chuckles. She raised her severed hand. Before the 5 Blood Clansmen could go near her, their entire bodies trembled. They then convulsed and fell onto the ground at the same time beside the mystic. Then, all of them started groaning in agony. Monster! Chris pounced forward while roaring furiously. His highly acidic blood with corrosive powers seeped out, corroding half of the blood mystic's body in the blink of an eye. Ah, using blood to fight against me? As the blood mystic smiled, the highly acidic blood that shrouded the air shook, and all the blood then coalesced into her body. Chris watched in surprise and bewilderment as the blood mystic absorbed his blood. As if she just ingested drugs of the highest quality, the later exaggeratingly opened her mouth and gasped in praise. And then, she nonchalantly plucked off her head that had grown at the wrong place, and put it back on her neck. Monster? Don't say that. She chuckled. Aren't you all becoming monsters soon, too? Simon flew towards the blood mystics back in a flash. He was about to attack when he saw the scene before him and was seized by terror. The 5 Blood Clansmen who had been kneeling and groaning suddenly began screaming in pain. A Blood Clan warrior watched in fear as a cloud of blood mist burst out of his chest. A blood-red hand then grew out of that hole, wriggled ceaselessly. The color of that hand was like that of a newborn baby. Ah no. This warrior was the toughest soldier. But right now, seeing the strange arm that kept wriggling on his chest, he emitted a scream of pain that was shaky because he was almost in tears. Help me. A strange eye suddenly opened on the back of that hand. Then, as if gaining consciousness, the hand grabbed the warrior's head, and tore off his head while he was alive. Rip! Blood splattered everywhere. Chris and Simon watched the scene in a daze. The lives of the other 4 warriors also ended in a similar manner. A peculiar tentacle grew out of one person's eye and dug her heart out. Hair had suddenly grown rapidly from another's head and pierced into his body to rip his spin into a dozen-something pieces. One clansman actually had another head identical to his existing head grow out of his shoulder and smile mischievously at him. It continued smiling at him until that warrior chopped off the head on his shoulder, then he died in a baffling manner. It was the scariest for the last person. 2 mouths filled with fangs actually grew from his palms and dashed towards his body. The mouths ate him up alive. Ah. What is this? No. No. Let me go. Monster. Die. Die. Don't. Don't. Ah, boom. Simon could not endure looking at what was happening anymore and attacked resolutely. He tore the blood mystic's body in half again. He then turned and ended the suffering of the warrior who was being eaten by his own hand. However, Simon was not completely unharmed. His sharp claw that was torn by the mystic immediately started convulsing without end. It began to expand, tear. Simon furrowed his brows and cut off his arm without hesitation. I thought you were too scared to attack. Chris sighed and stood up unsteadily. You know what she is, don't you? Simon stared, with mixed feelings, at his severed hand on the ground that started moving around. He also looked at his trembling body. Know what she is? Far more than that. His cousin brother's final expression appeared before his eyes. Simon clenched his remaining sharp claws tightly, shut his eyes, and spoke through gritted teeth. Yes, of course I am scared, but there is also hatred. Cousin brother, and all of Star Lake City, it was by such a monster that... Ha ha. Chris chuckled bitterly. He unfurled his skeletal wings as he watched the blood-red ball rise again. It appears that my power does not actually work on her. Bullshit, she can't be killed at all. Simon gritted his teeth and panted twice, exercising his sharp claws. If you're scared, then it's better for you to flee for your life quickly, and leave her to me. Chris snorted coldly. You mean leave you to her? Their eyes met and suddenly, both of them laughed at the same time. I truly miss those old days, Simon said softly. He felt his anxiety and trembling reduce significantly. Only 3 of you, Chris said quietly, getting rid of that massive, dark shadow that stood before the 4 of them in the past, from his heart. How much time do you reckon we can buy? Simon clenched his fists tightly. 3 minutes? Chris' brows were tightly furrowed. He watched as the blood-red blood mystic's figure walked out from the ball made of converged blood again. No ambition at all. Simon shook his head disdainfully and watched the maiden solemnly. It has to be, at least 5 minutes. The blood-red maiden walked slowly towards them. I have not exercised my muscles for a long time, she chuckled as she said, neither have my pets. The 2 blood clansmen's expressions froze. Rumble. A massive noise boomed. Amid their terrified gazes, a monster that looked like a massive, blood-red octopus crept out from the snow-covered ground and rose into the air. It was as tall as a few humans and was formed with countless pieces of severed limbs. It extended a huge tentacle and hoisted the blood mystic up. Roar! The blood-red tentacle monsters extended another two of its tentacles and attacked the two Supreme-class blood clansmen. Is this that thing? Simon asked, pale-faced. Ah, it appears that it is. Chris sighed and prepared to dodge early. He did not have fast speed like Simon. According to legend, Raikuru's archenemy in the Battle of Eradication, Hydra Kilika. The two blood clansmen vigorously flapped their skeletal wings to dodge the tentacles' attack. I just didn't expect. Chris said slowly that it was the blood mystic's pet. Then, the airborne Chris and Simon froze at the same time. Their skeletal wings flapped backwards and they pounced towards the Hydra instead. Damn it! Chris glared at his skeletal wings, flapping against his will, and at the increasingly large tentacle before his eyes in fear. The two tentacles split into a few dozen something other thinner tentacles. With a sudden burst of strength, they bound themselves tightly around the two Supreme-class blood clansmen. Boom! Thales watched the massive, blood-colored, tentacle octopus that crept out from the floor in a daze. Fortunately, he did not look at it too closely, or else, he would have probably thrown up at seeing the severed limbs wriggling inside it. However, the two silver-haired blood clanswomen only glared at each other fiercely. All of this is a disaster you caused. Katerina flashed out her sharp claws and a murderous glare shone in her eyes. I caused? No. Although Serena was heavily injured, she showed her remaining claws without backing down. I myself am your disaster, am I not? Selling out our family to a mystic, are you retarded? Katerina bared her sharp fangs. Serena lowered her body and prepared to launch a sudden attack. Ah, at least I don't have to be captured by you idiots, stop. Thales watched the fierce tree roots around them while he was between the sisters. He then looked despondently at the large, blood-red octopus that was a distance away. Stroking his fragile little heart, he raised his hand and said in exasperation, time out. After we escape from this danger, you can go on ahead, find a place, and rip each other to pieces. And no one will complain, okay? The sisters snorted coldly and turned their heads away. Boom! Their expressions immediately changed when they saw that both Supreme-class blood clansmen were entangled by a tentacle each. We will have to depend on your solution, brat. Serena turned her head and said coldly, after all, you have a shady relationship with the mystics. Look at the pot calling the kettle black. Thales said furiously, you were the one who made a deal with the mystic, taking the coffin and... At this moment, Thales suddenly had an idea. He turned towards the black coffin beneath his feet and looked at the tree roots that wriggled endlessly but did not dare approach. Hey! Thales extended both hands and poked the blood clan sisters on either side of himself. I heard that this broken coffin is a legendary anti-mystic equipment? Thales recalled Yodel's grey short sword, and what happened when it pierced through Asta's chest. The prince turned his head to look at the sisters. According to all of you, it is the only weapon that can fight against mystics. Katerina glared at Serena opposite her and shook her head coldly. It is useless, the Dark Knight Black Coffin's only function is to lock them up. Thales was stunned. Scratching his head, he asked, lock them up? Isn't that enough? That disgusting psychopath. Stupid, what she meant was that the Dark Knight Black Coffin has already locked one mystic up. Under Thales' puzzled gaze, Serena glared at Katerina in disgust. Serena said to him, if we are to lock up the blood mystic, we have to release the one inside first. Chapter 95, The Charm of That Shield. The dying Chris felt Hydra Kilika's dozen-something tentacles ignoring his corrosive blood and twisting tighter around his body. They even fused together with him during the process as they melted. At the same time, he stared at Simon, who was on the opposite of him as he sighed. How did you even fail to avoid this with your speed? I don't know. Simon struggled frantically but realized that his limbs were not listening to his orders. I felt like I lost control of my entire body, it was as if I gave myself up. The tentacles brought the two of them to their master. The blood mystic could be heard sighing. Thank you for not jumping up and down anymore, I can finally have a good meal again. Chris and Simon were slightly shocked. You know, the blood mystic was smiling as she said, ever since I was hit by that damn cannon by the dwarfs, I have been somewhat weak. Under Chris and Simon's terrified gaze, the blood mystic gently finished the last words of her speech. I need some replenishment. The next moment, the blood mystic extended her hands and caressed their faces with a smile. Absolutely not. Katerina's expression was solemn. This black coffin was named after the Dark Knight God's title. What makes you think that a criminal locked away by the gods is safer than the blood mystic? Of course, turning more than 10 chunks of sticky morsels that can move about is so much safer, Serena replied sarcastically. Thales lowered his head as he thought about the pros and cons of the situation. But suddenly, a voice was heard coming from behind him. So, who exactly is lying in this matter? A gentle voice came through. All three of them shuddered and turned around. The blood mystic was standing atop one of her tentacles, which was made out of broken limbs and blood. She smiled as she stared at them. Thales tried his best not to look at the wiggling, broken limbs and nausea-inducing organs in her tentacle. He then felt the two figures next to him moving in an instant. Hey! Thales stared at the sisters' departing figures and was only able to say one word. However, to his surprise, he immediately saw that both Katerina and Serena were shaking at the same time. Both of them had no control over themselves as they leapt off the black coffin and walked towards the tentacle below the mystic's feet. What is going on? What did you do to me? Katerina trembled as she walked forward one step after another, terrified and angry that she had fallen into the blood hole made by the tentacles. Where is Simon? Moron, is this not obvious enough for you? Serena also trembled as she moved, and she was twitching when the tentacle wrapped around her. She clenched her teeth and said, she has control over our bodies. I just recovered some strength, it has been a long time since I last used it, so I am still not too proficient with it. The blood mystic was laughing when she encased the two sisters into her tentacle made of broken limbs. Do not be anxious, I still need your blood later. The maiden turned her head around to face Thales. The second prince felt his skin crawl, but he met the blood mystic's gaze squarely. His heart started to beat furiously once again. Last time, something like this seemed to have happened in a chess room at Red Street Market. The tentacle moved while the mystic's blood-drenched, teenage face slowly leaned closer to him. You. The maiden was scrutinizing him carefully. The blood mystic took a deep breath. The blood flowing through your body has an indescribably familiar feeling to it. Blood? A shudder wrecked through Thales' body during that instant. Right. I still have my last move. He cleared his throat. Although I am not able to remember it, but for the sake of this blood, I will not let you suffer. The blood-red maiden laughed when she extended her palm to him. Wait a minute. Thales yelled. Miss, blood mystic? I. Thales squeezed his eyes shut and hesitated for a moment before he spoke with much difficulty. I am also a mystic. The blood mystic's expression froze for a moment. Thales gently opened his eyes and calmly voiced out the truth that he was most worried about, we are of the same species. The blood mystic remained unmoved as she spat out one word, lies. She pressed her hand against Thales' face. Wait a minute. I know as to say Kern, the air mystic. Thales immediately opened his mouth to talk again when he felt the warm blood on his face. According to Asda's words, I am a new mystic born after the Battle of Eradication. The blood mystic caressed his face with her bloody hand. Asda? Newborn mystic? The maiden giggled. How smart of you to choose that fellow who has just been sealed to vouch for you. I speak the truth. Thales' spirit almost left his body due to fright as he raised his hand and said, I can prove it. With that type of losing control. The maiden still had a smile on her face. However, her tone of voice changed. Losing control, she said softly. How did you lose control? Thales was momentarily stunned. He still knew too little about mystic energy. He could only try his best to recall the night at Red Street Market. Asda wanted to kill me, but my power appeared to interrupt him. There was an explosion. He said that only mystic energy could intercept each other. Thales frowned. He also said that I am the first in the last 1,000 years. He would guide me, if you need me to prove. But, he did not continue speaking. Enough. The maiden stared solemnly at him. So, it is real. You are a mystic. Thales widened his eyes. Just like that, does she already believe me? Isn't this too easy? However, the maiden seemed to notice his confusion. Your blood and life force are telling me that you are not lying. Blood? Life force? Thales recalled the control Asda had with air. Curiosity rushed up within him. You really believe me? He asked once again for confirmation. But the blood-red maiden ignored him. So, you are a person who has the potential to become a mystic, the first in the past 1,000 years? Thales breathed out a sigh of relief. It seemed like his life was spared once again. Asda said so, he also said. The maiden did not let Thales finish his speech. So, Asda found you. Thales could only shut his mouth and nod. The blood mystic only stared at him as she asked warily, which faction are you going to choose? The extremists, the obscurists, the moderators, or the magic empress? Ah. Thales had a confused expression on his face. The maiden furrowed her brows. Did Asda not tell you about the history of mystics? The 3 mystic civil wars and the 3 main treaties? Thales shook his head because he was not clear about these things. His confusion became stronger and greater. The mystics' civil wars? Are mystics not immortal? Why did they still participate in a civil war? The teenage mystic stared at Thales. Did he also not explain the 3 deaths, 1 prohibition rule among mystics to you? Thales widened his eyes and shook his head. The blood-red maiden's facial expression became increasingly sour. Did Asda inform you about the difference between matter and concept as well as the connection between chaos and purity? Thales sighed and shook his head in a resigned manner. In that case, which stage are you at in the 4 stages of mystics? You should know about this, right? Thales still shook his head in shame. The mystic stared intently at him, as if she was going to dig a piece of his flesh out of his face. Thales felt the pressure becoming bigger with each passing moment. Then, which of the magic tower's knowledge did you inherit? After a few seconds, the maiden spoke words that Thales had once read from books but he had no idea what they meant. Alchemy Tower? Soul Tower? Or Ascetic Tower? Or could you be an independent scion who wandered about in the outside world? What the hell? Thales' face was twitching. He was already numb to all the terms she threw at him. The second prince only shook his head stiffly. The maiden stared at him in disbelief. So, you do not even know the connection between mystic energy and magic, and the difference between mystics, wizards, and witches? Wait, do you know about wizards? Thales stared at her with an innocent expression on his face. You know nothing, how did you become the newborn mystic that Asda claimed? The mystic let out a long sigh. Thales lowered his head and spread his hands out discreetly. No teacher, no education, it is not my fault. You are no different from a normal person now, the mystic said quietly. Thales did not know how to respond to that. There was silence. Giza suddenly chuckled before she said, was it because of you that the idiot, Asda, went to the capital? Thales scratched his head. About that. I do not think so. It was a coincidence that we met. But, it was indeed because of me that he was sealed, Thales secretly thought. But of course, I cannot let you know about that. The maiden suddenly said softly, Giza. Thales' mind suddenly went blank for a moment before he lifted his head. What? The blood mystic moved her eyes up. Giza Streelman is my name. If you are also a mystic, or even a mystic's candidate, then you have the right to know my name. The two of them fell silent in an instant. Very good. Her enmity has disappeared. Thales felt much calmer. Then, the next step. Miss Giza, Thales said cautiously, I have a few friends from earlier. Why? The blood-red maiden, Giza cut him off before she laughed and asked. Confusion showed up on Thales' face. Giza stared at him with a profound expression in her eyes. If you are determined to become a mystic, why do you still want to mix around with humans, elves, and those blood clansmen? Darn it, who wants to become a mystic? A mystic that is always detested by others? But of course, he could not say it out loud. Thales scratched his head. About that, after all, I was born there. Giza shook her head and laughed silently. You cannot break away from the past, is that right? Just when Thales thought about what to reply, something unexpected suddenly happened. The next moment, the blood mystic, Giza pressed her hand against his face once again. Thales cried out in surprise, you. Do not worry, I will be quick, Giza said indifferently. Her tone was filled with a terrifying coldness. You will die silently and motionlessly. Die without any pain and suffering. Thales' pupils immediately contracted until they were mere slits. Wait. Why, he yelled furiously. Why do you suddenly want to kill me again? Are we not of the same kind? Thales asked angrily and in shock, your motive is to save the mystic in this coffin, right? If you want to save him, then why would you want to kill me? Giza stared at his expression, which was twisted in anger, and she started to gently caress his cheek as she put on a gentle smile, then glanced at the black coffin and asked softly, who told you that I wanted to save the mystic inside this coffin? A shudder ran through Thales' body. Seriously? She did not come here to rescue that mystic? Then why did she go through such trouble? An idea then blossomed in his heart. Thales trembled while he asked in disbelief, is this part of the mystic civil war that you mentioned just now? Giza gave him a faint smile but did not reply. We are already against the world, and we are at a great disadvantage. Thales did his best to hold back the panic inside of him while he tried to organize his words. Why do you still want to kill one another? If you kill me, the support you will have in this world will grow less. At least, take a moment and consider the future of the mystics. Giza laughed. This time, she sounded even happier than before, but the laughter also contained more anguish than before. The future of the mystics? Giza closed her eyes and slowly shook her head. Asda and the moderators he belonged to may still have the thought that eventually, the mystics will win back their future. Thales discovered to his surprise that the bloody hue on Giza's face slowly faded away to reveal elegant facial features, which she originally possessed. But he had no strength to observe her appearance. However, I have already given up a long time ago. Giza trembled as she laughed. It sounded more like crying to Thales. It would be better if those like us become fewer. What? The pain in our bodies and also the pain that we create are already enough, why do we still need a newbie like you to endure and bear that burden? This. Thales' eyes moved about as he stared at Giza, and his heart was filled with panic. Giza gently covered his face with her hand. The blood in his entire body started to shake restlessly. Be reassured, child, you will die peacefully here. Giza looked at him pitifully and gently caressed his hair. You will never become a mystic, I will never let you bear, the pain is a calamity. This is for your own good. At that moment, the second prince mustered up all the grief and indignation he could bring up from both his lives. He wanted to shout those 3 words to his heart's content, what the fuck? Plop. Waya fell to the ground weakly, unable to pick his sword up anymore. Poutre lay limp on the ground as he stared helplessly at Istron, who effortlessly picked up the immobile Waya. Damn it! You are that little bastard's attendant? God knows how much I hate him. Istron laughed nastily and bared his fangs at Waya's neck. However, his expression suddenly changed. He became very serious, after which he let go of Waya before abruptly disappearing. Clang! Clang! Sharp claws and a sword beam crashed into each other in the air. Sparks flew in all directions. Who are you? Istron roared angrily as he staggered away from the sword beam and took 3 steps back. A young swordswoman with black hair stood before the blood clansman and stared coldly at him. Her expression was unwelcoming and her features were heroic but intimidating. She was wearing a pair of thick, black gloves and holding a cross-shaped sword in her hand. The sword had a thin blade. Istron then narrowed his eyes. That sort of strength and angle in which she delivered the attack, is she another fellow who has mastered the power of eradication? Gallop! The sound of more than 10 horses galloping could be heard coming from behind the thicket. They're just right in front. Poutre's spirits were immediately lifted. He recognized that it was the veteran, Genard's voice. Istron's expression changed. Reinforcements? While he was deep in thought, the woman's sword beam closed in on him. Istron executed his moves with such speed that almost no man could match it. He avoided his enemy's attack in an instant. An attack at this speed was just child's play to him. He moved towards the swordswoman's side. I'll dispose of her, and then. But Istron had no chance to think anymore. To his great surprise, he felt a threatening, metallic chill moving to attack him right in his face. Rip! Istron stopped in his tracks. He lowered his head and looked at his heart. The swordswoman held her saber backwards and did not spare a glance behind her. She had thrust her blade out from her underarms. The blade pierced through Istron's heart directly. Istron trembled as he reached his hand out to touch the blade. When did you thrust your sword? He asked in disbelief. I did not, the swordswoman said coldly, and she pulled out the saber with her right hand, which clad in a black glove. You were the one who came to it. Istron covered his pierced heart and fell down without a sound. Wyakeso, who was struggling on the ground, clenched his teeth and raised his head. This power of eradication that compels its enemy to follow its rhythm, the Pegasus music. The swordswoman turned around and helped Waya up. Waya stood up strenuously. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of a mighty, flying falcon holding a branch in its beak. The falcon was embroidered on the swordswoman's black gloves. White-backed flying falcon? You are. Waya was momentarily stunned as he said the name. You are Miranda Arundi. The seed from the previous batch in the Tower of Eradication, he shouted loudly. However, Miranda ignored him. She coldly pressed him down to sit under the tree. More than 10 cavaliers, who were holding the double cross-shaped stars flag and the peculiar starlight flag, came out from behind the thicket. They then dismounted before Miranda and Waya. Sir! Genard walked to Poutre's side anxiously. Go and find the prince. Poutre stood up with difficulty as Genard assisted him. Prince Thales, he... Do not worry, Miranda cut him off coldly. Lady Cecile will handle this. Waya picked up his saber and got a shock when he heard the name. Lady Cecile? He looked at Miranda as emotions of surprise and delight rose in him at the same time. Do you mean that she came here personally? Her Excellency, the Fortress Flower? The day's experience affirmed Thales' belief that the best noun to describe the mystics was lunatics. They are just a bunch of lunatics. The prince yelled at the bottom of his heart. But he could not move his body, and the blood in his entire body seemed to start boiling. Thales could only shut his eyes and resign himself to fate. Right then. Giza paused in her movements and straightened her back to look behind her. Whoosh! An extreme rushing sound came from the direction she was looking at. Thales let out a sigh of relief and could not help but open his eyes. Rip! A tentacle beside Giza suddenly exploded. Arg! An angry cry rose into the air. A female warrior, dressed in armor with blood all over, was holding a two-handed sword. It was half a human's height. She advanced courageously through the blood that exploded and splashed everywhere. Rage burned within Giza's eyes as her other tentacle immediately intercepted the woman and attacked her. Silver light shone on the blade. Rip! The female warrior's two-handed sword swung in an exaggerated arc and chopped the second tentacle into pieces. Blood landed on her armor and even on her face, but the female warrior was not bothered by it at all. She kept on attacking with a zealous expression on her face. She came to Giza's side. Giza sneered and lifted both of her hands. Numerous small tentacles appeared on her body and shot towards the female warrior. Be careful! Thales yelled loudly. She can regenerate. Then he saw a scene that he would never forget till the end of his life. The female warrior threw away her two-handed sword without any hesitation. With lightning speed, she took out a gray, metal shield shaped like a rhombus from her back. Giza's small tentacles turned black, withered, and eventually crumbled into ashes the moment they got into close proximity with the gray shield. Giza's facial expression changed for the first time. The female warrior roared furiously when she held onto the handle of the shield and forcefully swung it outwards. Bang! Giza was struck to the ground. Then, with much agility, the female warrior held onto both sides of the shield and smashed it down ferociously. She used the shield to suppress Giza, who had a ghastly expression on her face. Thales was dumbstruck when he stared at the scene before him. This is... Captain Ameri, no, Thales saw the pattern of the double cross-shaped stars on the warrior's armor. Captain Constellation? I am Sonia Cecile. The female warrior's face was filled with a burning fighting spirit. I brought a gift for you, Your Excellency. The blood mystic, Giza's facial hue became really ghastly under the shield. It was as if the flesh on her face had been scalded by hot steam. Blisters kept appearing on her face and her face continuously withered into ashes. Giza stared unwaveringly at the shield and spat out a few words in defiance. No. This is... Yes. With her left hand pressing against the shield, the female warrior grinned and said in a heroic manner, allow me to introduce you to the legendary anti-mystic equipment. Sonia Cecile raised her right fist, slowly clenching it tight as she laughed. Supreme Shield. After she finished speaking, she ferociously punched her fist down onto the center of the silver shield, right in front of Giza's disbelieving gaze. Thud. Giza screamed furiously. She exploded into countless pieces of flesh and pools of blood, which immediately turned into flying ash and disappeared before the two of them. Chapter 96, I definitely will not let you suffer. Thales leapt down from the black coffin and watched everything before him in a daze. All the flying ashes disappeared, none of the blood and flesh remained. The severed limbs that littered the ground gradually withered, turning into ash and melting into the snow-covered ground under the moonlight. Has it ended? Giza, the blood mystic, that maniac, disappeared just like that? The Hydra's tentacles loosened their grip and withered. Both Katerina and Serena fell onto the ground and coughed violently. Supporting the deathly pale Ralph, Ida walked out of the thicket beside Thales. There were at least 100 of those tree branches, Ida said, still in shock. Why did all of them suddenly wither away? However, Ida was immediately taken aback. She pointed at the female warrior with exaggerated movements and exclaimed, "Ah, strange woman, you came." The female warrior placed the shield back on her back and laughed, "I haven't seen you for years, forgetful Ida." Ida's expression immediately darkened. The female warrior drew her two-handed sword and waved it a few times, as though it was not heavy at all. She flung the blood off the sword. Although her expression was calm, her gaze was sharp. She then turned and looked at Thales. Thales also curiously looked at this person who had suddenly appeared and saved his life. She is undoubtedly a soldier, he thought to himself. Her armor was smeared in the blood left by the mystic, but she exuded a steady and determined aura, causing her to not look pathetic despite the blood. Instead, she gave the feeling that she was exactly how a seasoned veteran would look like. She had neat, short, brownish-yellow hair. There was no need to overly describe her handsome looks since from the moment she appeared, her aura, one filled with staunch fighting spirit, would cause all who saw her to only pay attention to her status as a warrior and forget to pay any attention to her appearance. Their eyes met for a few seconds. The female warrior then suddenly grinned. She audaciously stuck her two-handed sword into the ground and knelt on one knee. "So, child, you are Thales, my prince?" "Yes. I am Thales Jade Star." Thales flashed a smile. "Thank you." Thales felt strange. While these people had all knelt on one knee to him, Gilbert's had been filled with courtesy and respect, Yodel's gave him a feeling of that he trusted Thales, and the female warrior before him exuded a kind of informality and elegance from head to toe. The warrior's next move confirmed his guess, because she actually raised her hands, clad in iron gloves and were covered in blood, and ruffled the hair of Constellation's second prince a few times. "Good job, kid," she laughed loudly. Her voice was valiant and sharp. Many of the new recruits under me might have puked from fear since the beginning if faced with that kind of situation. Thales was seeing stars from all the ruffling on his hair. Feeling the oiliness that came from the blood on the female warrior's hands, he awkwardly said, Madam." Laughing loudly, the female warrior cut him off. "I am Sonia Sasir, a mere lady of a territory." Sonia's words did not make her sound as if she was aware of what being a mere lady meant. She, being in an extremely good mood, even punched Thales' shoulder, making the weakened boy cough hard. "And I temporarily guard the broken dragon fortress, the border between the two kingdoms." Thales snapped out of his daze, "Ah. You are the fortress flower?" Even though he was already prepared before he embarked on this diplomatic mission, when he saw Sonia in real life, he was still a little excited. The fortress flower. In Mindy's Hall, Gilbert would sometimes weave in some explanations of Constellation's current circumstances in between lessons such as the most renowned Constellation's 3 commanders. Although Constellation suffered great losses during the disaster of the Bloody Year, it gained many talented people of many specialties from this nightmare. For example, those prodigious in government administration, foreign affairs, military affairs, and war. This was how many new nobles and people in the king's partisan became Constellation's pillars from the nobodies they used to be. The cunning fox, Gilbert, was one such example. And amid the blood and fire, in the battlefields where they faced off against Extet, the orcs and the barren bone people in the western desert as well as the rebels from the southwest, many young commoners rose to power and were given titles of nobility. After the Bloody Year, Kessel increased the number of regular soldiers in the army belonging to the royal family, even including plenty of commoners and young people, to guard the entire kingdom. These people were basically veterans who were baptized by war and had once shown outstanding performances on the battlefield. 12 years had gone by, and they have all faced different turns that led to different outcomes in life. However, 3 of them had their positions unshaken from the start, standing the test of time and growing into military commanders who could take charge on their own. They were Constellation's 3 commanders, famous throughout Constellation. The subjects of the kingdom gave all of them flashy nicknames to the point that their original names were rarely mentioned by anyone. The Kingdom's Wrath. The Legendary Wing. The Fortress Flower. Among them, the Fortress Flower, Lady Sonia Sasir, entered Constellation's history books when she followed Duke John on an expedition against the rebels in the southwest. Ever since the Bloody Year ended, she had led some of the regular soldiers of the royal family and guarded the bitterly cold northern territory, watching the great dragon of the north's every move. Many Constellationates believed that as long as the Fortress Flower remained in bloom and broken Dragon Fortress, Constellation's northern territory would stand tall and never fall. Of course, many of the ladies in the capital city often gossiped behind her back, her every move is like a man. Serves that knife-wielding, warmongering lady right, not being able to marry even when she is over 30 years old. And now, the legendary Fortress Flower stood right in front of Thales. "Ha! Araka would definitely regret not leading any forces to come to your aid. Pleased with herself, Sonia tapped her shield. I am the first one to seal a mystic among the three of us. However, in the next moment, Thales saw Sonia's expression change. What's wrong? Thales asked in surprise and bewilderment. Something's off. Sonia clenched her fists tightly and raised her shield, looking around her vigilantly. She was not sealed. Boom! Before Thales could react, Sonia abruptly picked him up and leapt from the ground to avoid a blood tentacle that pierced out from the ground. Thales stared at the tentacle before his eyes in disbelief. Wasn't Giza already? The tentacle abruptly divided into a dozen something smaller tentacles. Thales felt that the moment it split open, his entire body felt numb, as though it was injected with anesthetics. Is this the feeling of having your body controlled? Trembling, Thales let go of Sonia's arm, but the latter did not appear to be affected at all. She extended her arm and held him even tighter. Sonia gritted her teeth. Roaring furiously, she drew the two-handed sword from her back. Light shone on the sword, and when she swung the sword in a circular movement with one arm, the light on the sword emitted a magnificent arc, and as the sword shone, it chopped down countless small tentacles. A few of them curled towards their original position, from the dark night black coffin. Many of the tentacles contracted and withered before becoming flying ashes the moment they touched the black coffin. Just like when they touched the supreme shield. However, more tentacles curled onto the black coffin as if they did not fear death. As they withered and joined with one another, they withstood the corrosion of the legendary anti-mystic equipment and hoisted the black coffin up. Black coffin. Seeing this from a distance away, Katerina anxiously shouted loudly, we cannot let her take it away. Sonia was calm as usual and moved swiftly. Carrying Thales in one hand, she threw her two-handed sword with her right hand like a boomerang. Chop! It chopped off the tentacles that entangled the black coffin. Plop! The black coffin fell on the ground again. Moving her feet, Sonia rapidly leapt onto the black coffin. She put Thales down and unequipped the shield. She watched vigilantly as two tentacles reached out again from the darkness ahead. Impossible! Having seen the situation in front of him clearly, Thales cried out in surprise. Under the protection of two tentacles, Giza Streelman appeared before them in the form of a naked maiden covered in blood again with a smile on her face. Thales shuddered, but Sonia calmly held up her shield and took a step forward, shielding Thales behind her back. She furrowed her brows deeply. On the other hand, Thales had his eyes wide open and mouth agape. How is it that she is completely alright? Did Serena not tell him that the legendary anti-mystic equipment can be used to fight against mystics? He remembered that when Yodel sealed Asda before this, he had only stabbed Asda's back once while catching him unawares before Asda to burst into white light and disappeared without a trace. Both Yodel and Morat called that sealing? Thales had even thought that he had mastered some knowledge about the weaknesses of mystics, however, in front of him, Giza, why? Why? Are you thinking that it's strange? Giza chuckled, why did the legendary anti-mystic equipment not work on me? Sonia abruptly raised her hand and stopped Ida and Katerina who were about to charge over. Step back, she said loudly, as though she had the authority to execute orders and stop all people from taking any action with just one shout. Ida and the Queen abruptly halted in their steps. Sonia stared at Giza in front of her, her gaze was extremely solemn. I heard 2 legends about you from the kingdom's secret intelligence department. Sonia watched Giza with a determined expression. Firstly, the more enemies the blood mystic faces, the stronger her destructive powers and vitality becomes. This is because your enemies will all become your nourishment. The greatest misconception when it comes to fighting against you is, the more people, the better. That will only make you stronger as you fight. The best method is to have a supreme class elite who is agile enough and nimble enough to bring along a legendary anti-mystic equipment to battle with you alone in a wasteland without any living beings. Giza's smile faded a little. The kingdom's secret intelligence department. They are still as annoying as a few hundred years ago. A good choice. Curling up the corner of her lips, Giza nodded. It's no wonder why I can sense a lot of humans a few hundred meters away. You left all your manpower there and came here alone? Sonia snorted. It seems that your recon skills are also very strong. Then, the 2 tentacles abruptly extended towards Sonia. At the same time, more than 10 tree roots burst out of the ground and reached for Sonia and Thales. An attack that covered all sides, where they had nowhere to dodge. That fluctuation surged to all 4 of Thales' limbs again. He was about to dodge, but at that moment, he could only feel another surge of power blooming from Sonia's body. She turned and utilized her body's inertia to the maximum in an inconceivable manner. She slammed the shield in her hand against the tentacles hard. Boom! It reduced Giza's tentacles into flying ash. As the female warrior spun around, she let go of the shield. With great skill, she then quickly caught the edge of the shield in midair. Using it like a razor blade, she spun around again with the inertia and swung the shield horizontally, boldly chopping more than 10 segments of tree roots that attacked from below her feet into pieces. Swoosh! Shing! Sonia landed safely on the ground, completely shattering the Blood Mystic's attack with a flawless counterattack. Stunned, Thales stared at Sonia. The fluctuations in his body had already surged into his eyes. He could only see an intimidating, colorless energy fill Sonia's entire body. It was something entirely different compared to the jarring light in the mystic's body and the blood clansman's exuberant flesh and blood. This was the first time he used this fluctuation in his vision to observe a normal human being who was neither a mystic nor a blood clansman. That's a pretty good reaction. It is rare even among supreme-class human beings. Giza nodded admiringly. And you also have a familiar superpower. It's one of the 4 main original superpowers, the thawing of glaciers, known for taking advantage of the opponent's moves and counterattacking, right? It is now known as the power of eradication, Sonia said in derision, to commemorate the fact that we defeated all of you to the point that you all peed your pants in terror. Thales suddenly understood. So, that colorless energy inside Sonia's body was the power of eradication? I didn't know that you could also control plants. Sonia exhaled and vigilantly observed her surroundings. You are giving me a lot of surprises. Why? Is it because based on your understanding, only the red liquid inside the body of animals can be called blood? Giza chuckled. Sonia carefully exercised her wrists. The second legend about you was a little unbelievable until today. As Giza smiled, she recounted the legend, enunciating each world. It is said that the legendary anti-mystic equipment cannot seal the blood mystic. Thales stared at the blood mystic in shock. Cannot be sealed? Then, isn't she uncontrollable by anyone? How was the battle of eradication won? Impossible. Katerina cried out, the legendary anti-mystic equipment are the mystic's nemesis. All those who learned of it were taught this way. There was silence for a while. Giza flashed a smile first. Then, she sighed and said, the legendary anti-mystics equipment are the end of mystics. The nemesis of the calamities. The slightest touch would cause us to be doomed eternally. Is that so? Giza said with a calm expression. Lebla, Eric, and even the Truth Brothers are extremely terrified of that kind of weapon. Ever since then, they never let anyone go near them. That was how Lebla was sealed. Giza then chuckled and said with an incredibly chilling aura, however, I'm the only exception. I'm a mystic that relies on a physical body to battle. Thales' entire body trembled. He felt that these terms which he could not understand right now were knowledge that he would have to learn in the future. Even if it's not to become a mystic and even if it's only for my own sake. Giza continued to talk with a smile. I am also one of only 2 mystics who are unafraid of battling in close quarters with the legendary anti-mystic equipment. Even when danger comes near my body, I will not reject it. Oftentimes, those who approach me also approach their deaths. Thales furrowed his brows slightly. The only 2, unafraid to battle close range? Then who is the other one? So there is a large difference between mystics? The fear and curiosity towards mystics tormented Thales and at the same time, made him extremely hesitant. Giza smiled and said, even if legendary anti-mystic equipment hit my physical body, it will only hurt my flesh and blood, which are of no significance. It would be impossible for them to seal me. Thales furrowed his brows. No, something is wrong, somewhere. He was puzzled and was not able to figure it out until Sonia raised her brow and confidently let out a light snort. Is that so? She took a step forward and, as though she had found the enemy's weakness, she raised the supreme shield at the mystic. Then why were you running just now? Or is it that, you were hiding something during the time you disappeared? Giza's expression changed. Thales also managed to register what had happened. Yes, the shield did work on Giza's flesh and blood just now. After the first time she turned into flying ash, it took some time for her to reappear. During that period of time, whether she was healing, recuperating, escaping, or hiding, it could only mean that she is definitely not without any weaknesses. The legendary anti-mystic equipment are so rare and valuable, and are fought over by many kingdoms, Sonia said steadily. It is not only because they can seal mystics. More than that, it is because every single legendary anti-mystic equipment has their own unique and powerful ability, allowing the wielders to be reborn and totally remold themselves during battle. Thales gasped, legendary anti-mystic equipment, unique and powerful abilities? He looked at the dark night black coffin beneath his feet. Then he remembered Yodel's grey short sword. What power does that sword have then? Thales suddenly registered what went on. That short sword and the grey shield in Sonia's hand, their colors are so similar. Giza pursed her lips. The tentacles under her body started to tremble uneasily. Sonia tapped the supreme shield. You probably haven't seen this before. In the later period of the Battle of Eradication, when you all began fleeing desperately, this was made, together with the supreme sword. So you wouldn't understand its ability. Giza's expression changed again. When I received the shield, they told me this. Sonia snorted softly. The name of the supreme shield's power was the embodiment of Empress Helen's character. The blood mystic's expression became increasingly solemn. Thales felt that Sonia had already found her weakness. The female warrior laughed jubilantly. The name of its power is hunting. Then, as if having thought of the scariest thing ever, the mystic, with an ice-cold expression, swung her hand furiously. Boom! A voice that sounded like a flood exploded in the air. Under everyone's vigilant gazes, the large tentacles instantly dissolved into blood in severed limbs, and then they disappeared in the air. Giza hid in the darkness. She cast Thales a deep look. She left him a sentence, spoken in an airy voice, we will meet again. Thales shuddered violently. Giza's words carried a coldness that sent a chill into Thales' heart. I definitely will not let you suffer. Thales' face was pale and he felt uneasy. Definitely will not let you suffer, damn. Wait. It finally dawned on him. The blood mystic was scared off? She left, Sonia said in a faint voice, what a pity. I really want to chase her down. She tapped her shield. Thales exhaled deeply. Sarina. Thales turned his head. Katerina was gritting her teeth and glaring at an empty corner. She has escaped. The clatter of horse hooves traveled to their ears. Poutre, Waya and Genard appeared before them, escorted by a troop of cavaliers. Seeing them, Thales felt slightly at ease. It's just that, there doesn't seem to be many of the Jadestar family's private soldiers left. The night had ended again. The cavaliers marched to the front. They all nodded at Sonia and saluted her. They were led by a female knight with a cold expression. When her eyes swept past Thales, the latter could only feel a chill. Did I offend her? Thales scratched his head, baffled. At this moment, a shout that was filled with complicated emotions rose into the air. Captain! Sonia's entire body trembled. She turned and looked at the person who called. Thales was stunned. Could it be that Sonia is really Captain Constellation since she uses a shield? Under everyone's astonished gaze, the 30-year-old veteran, Genard, dismounted from his horse. Quivering slightly, he slowly went in front of the female warrior. He looked at Sonia with an excited, but worried and ashamed expression. Captain. His lips trembled, but he could not speak. I. Genard lowered his head deeply and gritted his teeth. I. Sonia looked at this veteran with a complicated expression. Genard. But the female warrior exhaled deeply. She raised her gaze, filled with an imposing look. Look at me, soldier. Sonia yelled. The veteran shuddered violently. He immediately straightened his back. He took a deep breath and looked right at Sonia. A few seconds later, Genard gulped and inhaled deeply. I am back, the veteran said firmly. Sonia eyed him carefully. After quite some time, she gave Genard's shoulder a punch and flashed a weak smile. Come back to us. Genard's entire body trembled. He gritted his teeth hard and blinked back his tears. The veteran shouted with all his might, yes. Pardon me for being frank, your highness. Sonia turned and looked at Thales, who was being meticulously checked for injuries by Waya. She furrowed her brows, but she immediately heaved a deep sigh. Although you went through a lot today, you still have to go to Broken Dragon Fortress as soon as possible. Thales did not really understand what she meant, but still nodded. Only the experienced vice diplomat, Poutre, who was behind Thales, changed his expression. He was pressing on his wound. Lady Cecile, he asked solemnly, what happened? Everyone went silent for a second. Sonia furrowed her brows tightly. She then looked straight at Thales. Extet's Archduke of Black Sand, Chapman Lampard, had already dispatched small units that passed through the border of the two kingdoms without hesitation a day ago. Sonia was expressionless, but her gaze was solemn. She answered, they are starting to purge the periphery of Broken Dragon Fortress, especially the lines of communication leading to Cold Castle and the lonely old tower. Thales' pupils narrowed. Sonia nodded and said solemnly, the northern territory is no longer safe. Chapter 97, Our Inland Sea. Broken Dragon Fortress was built in the northern plains, at the juncture between Constellation and Extet. The main body of the fortress was located on high ground, and was only a few hundred meters away from the border of the two kingdoms set by the Fortress Treaty. The Third Peninsula War more than 300 years ago created the legend of the three heroes among the Westerners, Chara, Kaplan, and Maidier. But after the war ended, the friendship of Extet's Chara the hero and Constellation's Oathkeeper Maidier fell apart, and their brotherhood ended. This caused countless historians and bards to put on dejected expressions and sigh, and the end of the brotherhood also led to the fallout between the Great Dragon and Constellation who were allies. Hence, Broken Dragon Fortress, located at the border between the two kingdoms and has political significance as well as military purposes at the same time, was built. 12 years ago, the famous Fortress Treaty between Constellation and Extet was signed here. The northern plains, which extended for miles, was the only place between the two kingdoms where large numbers of soldiers could be stationed while avoiding the large, snowy forest. However, the defenders of Broken Dragon Fortress could clearly see any groups of more than 10 people ascending from Extet. On Constellation's side, the Arundi family's Cold Castle and the Zamunto family's Overwatch City was at the fortress southwestern side, while the Fries family's Lonely Old Tower was at the fortress northern side. All three parties could rush to the fortress aid at any moment. If any of the castles were in danger of being besieged, Broken Dragon Fortress could also warn them in time. Broken Dragon Fortress was not a solitary castle. It was made up of the fortress star-shaped main body, which was the largest and steadiest building on the highland, and it was surrounded by 8 medium-sized forts which guarded the periphery and surveyed each other. There were also 12 simple sentry posts further away. To take down Broken Dragon Fortress meant that countless moats and chevaux de frise had to be broken through. The threat of bows from the 8 medium-sized forts also had to be eliminated one by one. The fortress main body could then only be reached by walking through the only 3 narrow slopes that can reach it. Lastly, under the limited terrain that allows movements, a siege had to be launched at the fortress wall over 10 meters tall, while braving the attack of the mystic guns on the star-shaped, convex walls. If the main forces circumnavigated the fortress and directly headed south to the important cities of Constellation, this fortress, which could fit 10,000 people, had plenty of supplies, and had troops in the base that could launch an attack any time, would then immediately become the main threat, like a thorn in one side. When Extet's Archduke of Black Sand, the 41-year-old Chapman Lampard, looked up at this giant from the fortress northern side while basking in moonlight, he felt an especially strong threat from Broken Dragon Fortress, since it was easy to defend and hard to attack. Since he had a fair duel with his own elder brother in front of his father and the entire family 12 years ago, then won the right of inheritance to the Black Sand region by piercing through his brother's heart with a sword, Chapman Lampard's ambition grew uncontrollably. He began to dream of bringing the glory of becoming the common elected king to the Lampard family, to turn Black Sand City into Extet's capital city, and to bring Constellation's northern territory into his governance, reuniting the ancient Northland territory, which was now split between the two kingdoms, into one. The Archduke wore a thick robe lined with heavy chain armor. He rode a healthy and strong Northland horse. The knights behind him held flags that had the pattern of an iron fist that represented the Lampard family on it. Dense military camps were stationed behind them. From time to time, low-ranked riding sentries or infantry units would leave the military camps and cross the border nonchalantly. A healthy and strong knight who had a soldierly bearing and wore a grey helmet, one of Extet's 5 war generals, Lord Tolja, sped over from the front. He reined in his horse before Lampard and immediately bowed respectfully. Lampard nodded expressionlessly. Whether it is caravans, hunters, supplies, or the enemy's patrol teams, we have already cleared them all from the path and placed our mobile sentries there. If Cold Castle's Arundi and the other two families come to the rescue, we will know at the first moment. Tolja said in a deep voice, "Are we really attacking?" "Of course. We have more than 13,000 soldiers. We have light cavalry scouts, heavily equipped knights, hand-picked and lightly equipped executioners, doppelsoldners, and enough archers. We also prepared mystic guns, catapults and other equipment needed to lay siege to a city." The one who replied him was a knight wearing plate armor and was standing behind Archduke Lampard. He was the Archduke's supporter and #1 vassal, Count Levon. "We are at an advantage, whether in terms of quantity or quality. Defeating them is as easy as flipping our hand. That is open warfare, but as long as they are holed up in Broken Dragon Fortress, it would be hard for us to achieve an easy victory." Tolja shook his head. "Ever since the fortress fell into our hands the last time, they strengthened its fortifications. I suspect that they have equipped half the mystic guns and city defense crossbows in their kingdom there. To forcefully lay siege would only lead to a large number of casualties." And, Tolja thought, as long as those two are at Broken Dragon Fortress, even if there is only a disorderly mob against us, we should be extremely vigilant. Count Levon, donned in plate armor, had a determined expression on his face. "We mobilized so many soldiers. It is impossible for us to return without accomplishing anything. If we can seize Broken Dragon Fortress, I reckon that we can accept some casualties on our side. Our enemy is not only the fortress, but also the weather." They turned their heads. Archduke Lampard's wise general and advisor, Viscount Kent Vida, arrived on horseback behind them. The day before the bitter cold winter will arrive earlier than in previous years. It is not a good time to advance. The situation is not promising for us when it comes to the transportation of supplies. If the siege does not go well, and there is a deadlock in battle, if we wait for the beginning of spring, we have a bigger chance of seizing the fortress. It is precisely because there are not enough supplies that we should do it quickly. Count Levon was still determined. It is to our advantage to battle in winter. The Constellations will be dealt a bigger blow because of the winter. 12 years ago, we seized the fortress at this time. That was the warmest winter in a couple dozen years. Tolja shook his head solemnly. And at that time, they were busy enough with their own affairs. There were no reinforcements in the northern territory. But at the time, we had all 7 armies from the 7 archdukes. And we can only restock our supplies on the spot after breaching the fortress and after we headed south. Archduke Lampard slowly raised a hand and halted his 3 subordinates' arguments. "How are things at the back?" The Archduke's voice was dreary and dull, carrying some kind of power that made people become instinctively quiet. "King Neuvin's envoy has already arrived. We have no way of holding him back for too long. After all, we are dispatching troops in the name of revenge for Prince Maria." Viscount Kent Vida bowed. "Besides, I heard that the Prince of Constellation is already on his way and will arrive soon." Lampard contemplated and asked, "Prestige Orchid Region's Alcius family and Reformation Tower's Trentida family, have they not replied yet? As fellow archdukes of Extet's southern region, they should have enough reason to dispatch their soldiers." "They have definitely received the news of the Prince of Constellation's diplomatic visit," Viscount Kent Vida answered seriously. "Even though they could probably obtain benefits by seizing the northern territory, they will hesitate just as much as the other archdukes. I am afraid that we will have to depend on ourselves." After some time, Archduke Lampard exhaled. Looking at the Broken Dragon Fortress across from him, he heaved a long sigh and said, "Depend on ourselves? Sasir, that woman only has over 800 people. However, at least 300 of them are elite veterans from the Starlight Brigade. They are not only good riders, but also dauntless soldiers who attack and defend well. Having fought against her before, you should all be very clear about this. Murch just arrived with over 2,000 people. Although most of them are garrison soldiers who have never seen blood, that man is too scary. As long as he has 500 extremely loyal and dauntless sword and shield troops, he would be able to create great trouble on the battlefield. There are also a few thousand vassal troops that are heading over one after another. Although the fact that Arundi was put behind bars caused the soldiers in the fortress to be disunited with each other, and most of them had already withdrawn, Arundi's only daughter is still at the fortress. According to the investigation of the scouts, at least 500 of them stayed. Without the military strength of the other archdukes, we will have to battle very hard if we want to seize Broken Dragon Fortress." Archduke Lampard's words made the 3 of them go silent for a while. To have 3,000 people squeezed into one fortress. Count Levon furrowed his brows and spoke, with the Northern Territory's pitiful supplies, how long can they keep up? That fortress was built to accommodate 10,000 people. It has enough reserves by itself, and can help them last till the day before the bitter cold winter. Viscount Kentvita shook his head. Forgive me for being frank. As the side who will lay the siege, our pressure is much higher than theirs when it comes to supplies. 12 years ago, the entire Ekstedt was behind us. And now, because the dead prince is coming to apologize, we are as isolated and helpless as the Northern Territory. The day before the bitter cold winter will be coming in less than 2 weeks. Tolja also nodded in agreement to the wise general's words. If we do not get a good opportunity, I do not suggest that we forcefully attack. When that prince arrives, it would be even more impossible for us to dispatch troops. Count Levon said indignantly, and in another 10 years, Constellation will slowly recover from its weakened state, and other kingdoms will also be free of their respective troubles. Besides. He paused for a moment. If Nuban VII is not able to live till then, there will possibly be a king selection in Ekstedt. How can we just give this opportunity up? Count Levon spoke in a hateful tone. The other three did not speak. No. Chapman Lampard slowly exhaled, creating a mouthful of mist and stared at the fortress in front of him. We are Northlanders. Lampard thought of his elder brother. Of how he held his sword with hands full of blood, and his gaze when he died with a heroic laugh. Northlanders never wait for opportunities, nor do we give up on opportunities. Archduke Lampard turned his head around. His stern face had a freezing look that was colder than the weather. We create opportunities. The moon had already appeared. Broken Dragon Fortress was just in front. Its magnificent star-shaped contour could already be seen vaguely under the moonlight. Watching Sonia and Ida, who were looking around vigilantly a distance away, Thales turned towards Katerina, who was surrounded by the elite warriors of Broken Dragon Fortress and the 2 Blood Clan warriors behind her who were only found after the battle. Are you sure that you want to leave now? Furrowing his brows, Thales looked at Katerina, who was in front of him. Perhaps the Blood Mystic is lying in wait on the path you will take to return. Katerina's expression was as indifferent as usual. She shook her head. This is the best time to leave. At least, the Blood Mystic would not dare to lurk around in places that are too near to this place. This is too risky, Thales spoke earnestly. You know that the Blood Mystic came for the Black Coffin. Trust me, since the Blood Mystic had already showed herself and caused such a big trouble, there will be people keeping an eye on her whereabouts and intentions. For example, your kingdom's secret intelligence department. Katerina spoke coldly. Although mystics are terrifying, there are still forces of power that can restrain them in this world. Are you talking about the legendary anti-mystic equipments? Thales contemplated and spoke, but they are after all so rare. There are only a few. You are still young, and have yet to know many secrets. Katerina's words made Thales scratch his head. The only thing you need to know is that, every single time mystics appear publicly, they are taking a risk. After that, they would be quiet and go into hiding for a very long time. The legendary anti-mystic equipments are not their only threat. Their eyes met for a second. Alright, since you insist, Thales sighed, you have to know that all the supreme classes by your side had died in battle. Serena might still be hiding in the darkness, waiting for a chance to strike, and you are after all, bringing along and protecting a legendary anti-mystic equipment. Remembering Hestad and Simon, Katerina's gaze dimmed. However, she then raised her head. I yearn for Serena to appear. The Night Queen revealed a gaze full of hatred. As for the Dark Knight Black Coffin, perhaps it is a legendary anti-mystic equipment many powerful parties would like to have. But do not worry, as apart from the terrifying mystics, there would be absolutely no one who would dare try to obtain it. No. Katerina thought, perhaps with the exception of those relatives of mine in Grand Banquet Hill. After all, it is the entire Blood Clan's pledge to guard the Dark Knight Black Coffin. Thales rolled his eyes. Is it a secret that I am not aware of again? He nodded. Although it can be said that our bad luck today is thanks to each other, with blood debts, enmity and favors involved, I still hope that we do not become enemies. Of course, I hope we don't meet again, Thales said with a serious look. Katerina stared at him intently for a few seconds. She did it for so long that Thales raised his brows. You know, Katerina said quietly, maybe we can really become allies. Thales widened his eyes. I heard Serena's words, the Night Queen said flatly, the situation in the peninsulas had changed. You all have relations with main Equinox dynasty, and Ekstedt is in good terms with Hanbul. Since Constellation is fated to be enemies with Hanbul, we have a common enemy. Thales furrowed his brows. I almost forgot that, she is a queen. After forming an alliance, we can rope in the Misty Islands merfolk leader. That way, we can chase away Hanbul and the Trade Federation's whalers. It would not be impossible for us to make the Southern Sea of Eradication our inland sea. Think of all those eternal oil that is swallowed up jointly by Hanbul and the Trade Federation. Oh please, it's thanks to your dear older sister. Thales exhaled and shook his head, with fear still lingering in his heart. Right now, I really have an extremely deep fear towards the word ally. For your sake, and also for my sake, let's discuss this when I'm a little older, okay? Katerina, who was cut off in a baffling manner, was stupefied for a moment. Her parted lips could not close in time. Looking at that pair of lips, for some reason, Thales thought of their taste. Ahem. Thales tapped his head, getting rid of those weird thoughts. He had enough troubles, and he was already busy enough with them. The Night Queen, who had always maintained a stern face, suddenly curled up the corners of her lips softly. Thales was a little surprised. It was his first time seeing the stoic Katerina smile. Sorry. Thales frowned. What are you saying? Katerina spoke slowly. When you extended your neck towards me, my original plan was to suck all your blood dry. Thales shuddered violently. What? After all, there was already hatred between us because of the battle earlier. Katerina continued speaking with that ice-cold expression again. As long as I finish off Serena and wipe out all your other subordinates, then cleared off all traces. Apart from Kovendir, no one would know the truth of the Prince of Constellation's death. Thales felt a chill running down his spine as he watched the Queen talk about sucking him dry. Thales had a look of disbelief on his face. Is this the farmer and the viper, the one in Aesop's fables? However, you have a tenacious vitality, and did not die from the loss of blood like I expected. Katerina spoke coldly, so, my attempt to kill you failed. I reckon that you have the right to know about this. Thales' expression changed many times. He felt the weakness in his body and touched the 2 holes on his neck that had already healed. He then raised his head and looked at Katerina with a surprised and furious expression. You. With furrowed brows, Thales spoke furiously, and Serena, you two are indeed a pair of good sisters. However, Katerina only looked at him with a distant gaze and with a complicated expression. No, please take my honesty as a token of sincerity to form an alliance. I did not hide anything from you, and do not plan to hide anything from you either. This is something Serena, who puts on an act all her life, can never do. The Queen nodded slightly. This should be able to remove your wariness and build the foundation of trust for our possible alliance in the future. Thales was immediately stunned. He was rendered speechless for a moment. You were telling me that you wanted to kill me, he furrowed his brows and spoke, and then you were saying that this is how you treat me with sincerity, hoping that I will trust you? Don't you think that something is wrong somewhere? Thales spoke tauntingly. I believe that you are mature enough to differentiate whether I am sincere or not, Katerina spoke flatly. You know, I do not treat you as a child. Thales was tongue-tied for a moment. However, recalling his experience of almost being sucked dry, he could not help but be peeved. Oh, speaking about that, Thales snorted and spoke vengefully. Yo, was that your first kiss? Katerina's pupils suddenly narrowed. Her expression became cold in the blink of an eye. She spoke chillingly. What did you say? Her purple eyes shot towards Thales. Under the Queen's murderous gaze, Thales immediately felt a chill running down his spine. He only felt slightly reassured when he saw the soldiers and the 2 supreme-class elites around them. Thales scratched his head awkwardly. I was saying, there are readers who want to know, cough, cough, no, it's just that a lot of people in the Eastern Peninsula seem to care a lot about this. Therefore, I wanted to know if I offended you anywhere, so that I can apologize. No, of course not, Katerina spoke coldly. Did you think that I am some teenage girl who just reached puberty? First kiss? How childish. I have lived for a much longer period of time than all your ancestors added together. These words sound a little familiar. Thales shrugged and scratched his head, a little embarrassed. Wow, even an ice queen like you had a first love? Watching Katerina's face, which was as cold as an ice cube, he stuck his tongue out. Your first love, hey, I can only say, that man sure had it rough, huh? Okay then. Thales sighed. He then raised his head and spoke earnestly, I wish you all the best. May we never meet again, he added another sentence in his heart. Katerina stared at him in silence. She suddenly extended her hand to him and passed him a bracelet that had 2 fangs strung on it. The fangs looked ferocious and primitive, with thin, blood-colored patterns on it. It looked like a keepsake from his past life. Thales widened his eyes and looked at her with a puzzled gaze. This is Corleone family's keepsake, the blood fangs. Queen Katerina spoke with a serious expression. If you come round to the idea one day, come and see me with it. However, to form an alliance with immortals is not exactly something that would give you a good reputation among humans. Before you make up your mind, please do keep it a secret from others. I suggest that you personally safeguard this keepsake. Thales furrowed his brows. In the end, he sighed and simply grabbed that fanged bracelet. I will throw it away when I get back. Thales thought. Be careful on your way, he said quietly. Take care of yourself, little Prince Thales. Katerina nodded expressionlessly, turned and walked towards her subordinates and the black coffin. Don't forget our inland sea. Thales rolled his eyes behind her. The next moment, the Night Queen and her subordinates disappeared from his sight along with the black coffin. Thales sighed with sentimentality welling up in him for a second and turned to leave. At this moment, the secret telepathic voice exclusive to BloodClansmen faintly rang inside his ears. But that was indeed my first kiss with someone of the opposite sex. Thales shuddered violently. He then staggered. It frightened Waya, who was beside him. Waya immediately ran forward to support him. I thought it was agreed that this world is not a novel with a simple plot. He sighed and looked at the darkness where Katerina disappeared. Hatred aside, perhaps this queen has more similarities to her elder sister than what she imagined. Chapter 98, Araka Merch. Eternal Star City, Blackstreet Brotherhood's headquarters at XC region. Are you saying that Rhoda and the reversed machete? One of the 6 powerhouses of Blackstreet Brotherhood, Anton the Ripper took a bite from his bread and spoke in a string of indistinct mumblings. Because of what? Seems like it is Rhoda's son. On the other end of the long table, the other one of the 6 powerhouses, Morris crossed his arms across his chest. He laid them on his fat tummy and spoke impatiently. You know, I had to constantly take care of that piece of trash at my place so that he could manage those child beggars, and it lasted until he died at Red Street Market. It was because of this that Rhoda's relationship with Lance and me apparently reached an impasse. In that case, the reversed machete is in an extremely bad mood? Has Sunset Pub already shut down? Anton let out a chuckle and took a sip of ale. What a shame, I did kind of like that little girl at the pub, tisk, tisk, that figure. Her last name is Charlton, you won't be able to touch her. Morris' cold words made Anton choke. I have not returned for a long time, so I am not clear about this. The Charlton brothers have not made their appearance even after the matter of Sarah Dukedom? Anton swallowed the bread. Morris shook his head. Prison Lock Sickle has been tracing them for a few years, and for that, he did not even hesitate to work with the Secret Intelligence Department. He did fight hand-to-hand with the younger Charlton twice, but he did not benefit from that. What about the older Charlton? Anton asked immediately, that person who killed 80 II. It is best not to mention him, Morris sighed. You know, that year, he saved Black Sword's life in front of the palace gate. Regardless of whether it was intentional or otherwise, Black Sword took that to heart during all these years, and you could say that he was agonized by it. They would eventually need to fight each other. Anton sighed. At this very moment, a figure wearing a scarlet cloak pushed the door open and entered the room. The figure then sat at the table. Morris and Anton's facial expression became solemn and serious. Shortly after, the figure in the scarlet cloak spoke. His speech made the other two people's faces change color due to agitation. You better explain this clearly to me. What do you mean by lost contact? Astonished, Anton slammed his fist onto the table and asked. He stared in bewilderment at one of the 6 powerhouses, the Sleepless Eye, Cobry and Lance. What I mean is, Lance held his scarlet cloak as he furrowed his brows and said, we have stopped receiving any news from Ramon for the past 7 days. The last time he sent a message was when he was at the eastern border between Constellation and Extet. There is only one explanation for this, he ran into enemies. Morris hugged his arms tightly around himself and muttered, his mission was only to use news of the reappearance of wizards to avert the attention of the Secret Intelligence Department, so that we can safely acquire that equipment. When the Black Prophet discovered that he was not actually a wizard, he should have naturally given up on pursuing him, right? The fat one shook his head and his confusion showed on his face. An ordinary gang doctor, neither the Secret Room nor the Secret Intelligence Department have any reason to arrest him. No, of course they do not have a reason. Unless this is the opponent's move against the Brotherhood and our sponsor, a lot of people have doubts about our patron, Lance said sinisterly. Also, you and I both know that Ramon is no ordinary gang doctor. There are people targeting us and also our sponsor? Anton was shocked. Are you saying that the Blood Bottle Gang is the one targeting us? Even though the Air Mystic does not usually appear, but after the Red Street Market incident, they have been more silent than before. Catherine and Nicholas are both overseas. Lance shook his head. I have learned something through the grapevine. They have found the Blood Mystic. I am afraid they will soon launch a counterattack. I am also worried that they may have already discovered the importance of Ramon to us. He lightly tapped against the table. If the Blood Mystic becomes the one who attacks, hey! The key is our sponsor. Morris considered this seriously. If Ramon falls into their hands, it will certainly jeopardize the safety of the sponsor. Maybe we should warn the sponsor? We cannot risk being exposed and contacting the sponsor. Lance's eyes were shining brightly. I suspect that this could be a trap. Morat likes to throw this sort of bait the most. Maybe the area surrounding Blackstreet is already filled with spies of the Secret Intelligence Department, and they are just waiting for us to make a wrong move. What's more terrifying is, if it is not Morat and his Secret Intelligence Department but the conspirators that year. Lance did not show his feelings or speak of his worries. No, without Ramon, our study on the Mystic's weakness will come to a standstill. We finally had a little progress after 11 or 12 years. Anton tightly clenched his fist. And we still do not know anything about the origin and ability of that equipment. We have yet to explore anything. Morris immediately lifted his head and his expression was serious. Also, he knows too many secrets about us and our sponsor. Are our people at the border between Constellation and Extet usable? For instance, the Crystal Drop smuggling team located at the border under your lead, Anton? It will be very hard. Anton the Ripper clenched his teeth. The atmosphere there has been quite high-strung recently. The merchants are all afraid that Constellation and Extet are going to declare war, so they no longer go to the areas around Broken Dragon Fortress. My people already evacuated the area a long while ago. Anton's face turned ashen also. If the Blood Mystic is about the same as the Air Mystic, then, forget about our subordinates, even we would die if we go there. Maybe there is another method, Lance said quietly. The other two people looked at him. Lance the Sleepless Eye could be heard saying faintly, with regard to the border between Constellation and Extet, the Black Sword is not far from there, he can go ahead and search for Ramon. And I have already handed the equipment over to him. If he really ran into the Blood Mystic, let it be a chance to test the equipment's performance in advance. The sun had just risen. Thales had a sullen expression on his face as he was protected by Sonia on the horse. The group passed through the sentry and the fort, scaled the narrow slope, then slowly moved into the magnificent Broken Dragon Fortress through the south gate. The place was so much colder than the birch tree forest. The snow was also much thicker, as its height almost reached an adult's ankle. This was a very big fortress, but the double-layered city walls made the space between the fortress gate and the inner city wall seem relatively narrow. Thales got off the horse with Sonia's help, and the soldiers took the seriously injured Waya, Ralph, and Cora to be healed. He observed this particular corner of the fortress. It was neat and orderly from the building layout itself to the sentries and staff stationed there. The soldiers on duty were either patrolling the main roads and some of the city walls in the fortress, or they were on guard duty at their respective locations. The quartermasters who were in charge of logistics and replenishments were walking back and forth to urge the laborers to transport the supplies. In some rather spacious stables, the cavaliers were baiting their steeds with well-practiced movements. On the other end of the training field, there were a few squads made of new recruits that were obviously enlisted not long ago. They were practicing defensive moves and slashing motions in an orderly manner under the guidance of a few veterans. A distance away, a few squads who just came back from their duties were queuing up to return their weapons to their original places. After that, they received the rations distributed by the quartermaster. Gennard followed Sonia and she enthusiastically embraced more than 10 powerful-looking veterans, who seemed to be her old acquaintances. This is the northern barrier of Constellation? Those are Baron Murch's regular soldiers from the royal family, and their numbers have just increased. Right at that moment, Poutre dragged his injured body and walked over to Thales, supporting himself with a branch. Poutre stared at the squad of recruits who were training and said, "They do not really have any experience of fighting in a battle." Thales nodded. "I thought you would at least leave that important queen in Broken Dragon Fortress. You know, our strength is already stronger than hers." Poutre said quietly, but, whether she was deceived by others or the other way around, she has already attacked the diplomat group and made countless debts of blood. So what? Did we bring her here to spank her? Thales shook his head. She is an important political leader of the Eastern Peninsula. We need a lot of proper reasons to keep her, and there is even more trouble in terms of diplomacy. Also, a mystic was involved. And my secret is also involved. It is best to have lesser troubles. Poutre raised his eyebrow. Thales let out a sigh. Believe me, the real culprit is still strutting about in the world outside, freely. Letting Katerina go is also causing him problems. Zayan's face appeared in his mind. Regardless of the reason you wanted to kill me, I will never sit still and let you do so. Also, maybe I have already found the key, Thales thought. The key has to be in the conversation we had the day I left on this journey. There must have been something that set Zayan off. He would have never done something so irrational otherwise. Not only does it involve lying to his ally, it involves endangering himself. In addition, she is still carrying that black coffin with her. Thales continued. What he said made Poutre furrow his brows lightly. With that thing by her side, it equates to allowing the blood mystic to find us again. Although she will certainly come and find me. I will never let you suffer. Thales sighed and thought worriedly. Do not worry, Poutre seemed to see through Thales' worry as he slowly said, Extet also has their own legendary anti-mystic equipment. The amount of equipment they have is even greater than Constellations. It is the country with the most legendary anti-mystic equipment in the world. After all, the Northland did their utmost in battling the calamities during the Battle of Eradication. Thales nodded reluctantly. As for the calamities, as long as you are not interested in them, they will not be interested in you. Poutre spoke with an underlying meaning in his words and his gaze was profound. A violent shudder erupted in Thales' heart. Poutre, what does he mean? Right at this very moment, Sonia's dignified voice could be heard coming from the front. What is going on? Thales and Poutre both lifted their heads in curiosity and looked towards the front. There seemed to be a scaffold there, which was jam-packed with soldiers off duty. There was a person on the scaffold who was sent to that place by the soldiers behind him. It seemed like he was about to be executed. A military officer who appeared to be the person in charge recognized Sonia as he was somewhat awkward when he answered, Lady Cecile, this person is a deserter of the army. Sonia furrowed her brows and looked at the person on the scaffold. It was a tanned, young man with black hair and brown eyes. He struggled to lift his head up before the scaffold and yelled loudly, I am not an army deserter. I am not. He was wearing a torn cotton shirt and his hands were tied together behind his back. He yelled at the surrounding crowd in an indignant manner, they fell behind, I went back to save them. I did not escape. Just look at the blood on my weapon and you will know. Thales stared at the situation and whispered to Poutre, have we already engaged in a war with our enemy? I am afraid that it is a conflict among a small number of squads, Poutre muttered, it seems like Lampard is still unwilling to give up. Thales secretly sighed at the bottom of his heart. The military officer in charge of the execution looked at the struggling young man and said in disdain, this fellow is lying. There is indeed blood on his pike, but it had already been broken into two earlier on. You ran back with a broken weapon in your hand, and then tell me that you were going back to rescue them? I did not, the young man with his hands tied said anxiously, it was not broken into two. That is exactly how my pike is. There are two of them, one for my left hand and another for my right hand. I can use them both at the same time. Enough. Fisherman. You just spin lie after lie. The officer in charge dismissed him with a swing of his hand and a sour expression on his face. Quibbling does not help you at all. Act like a Northlander, just be forthright about this. Wait. Sonia turned and looked at the person in charge with a grim expression on her face. He is a soldier I recruited from the area. Before you execute him, don't you need to come and seek instructions from me? The military officer was momentarily stunned. But there is already conclusive evidence on this matter. We have gotten instructions from Baron Murch, Sonia cut him off impatiently. Put him down, I will personally investigate this matter, and only then will you carry out the sentence. The military officer in charge furrowed his brows. But, this is on Baron Murch's order, he said. Murch? I am the commander of Broken Dragon Fortress, Sonia said sternly, and how many days has it been since Murch arrived in this place? All of you, including him, are only reinforcements, staying here as guests. The fortress flower's facial expression became cold. Or do you have any opinion on my authority? The military officer stopped speaking and stared at his surroundings with a troubled expression. However, he had no choice but to obey her due to the dignity and prestige of the fortress flower. The man with black on the scaffold sighed in relief. He was immediately brought down from the scaffold and pushed down to the ground before Sonia. Soldier, report your name and your unit. Sonia came before him and said coldly. The young man quivered. Willow, my name is Willow, Your Excellency. The young man stared gratefully at Sonia as he panted, Willow Ken. I am a pikeman recruited from Charlatan County. Also, I am really not an army deserter. Right at this moment, a commotion rose from the crowd. A sonorous, bright but impatient voice belonging to a man came from afar. Sasir. Sonia's brows were tightly furrowed together. She lifted her head and turned her gaze towards the direction of the voice. I hear that you are publicly causing me troubles again? Thales stared curiously at the spot where the commotion came from. He saw the soldiers move to both sides to clear a path. There was a man with maroon hair. He was of a medium height but a strong and muscular build. He was wearing a simple breastplate and a green-colored wrist protector. He had a high-nose bridge and his facial features were sharp. His light green eyes were fierce, and he was carrying an eye-catching metal bow, which had alternating colors of silver and black as he strode out of the crowd. More than 10 sword and shield troops followed behind him. They were all expressionless. Behind Thales, Ida, who once again covered her face, seemed to anticipate something fun as she whispered, Wow. It's him. They're going to fight. They're going to fight. The soldiers on both sides were whispering among themselves. Many people were staring at the man who was walking over with excited and nervous expressions on their faces. Thales was momentarily stunned. Who is he? This man seemed to have his own aura that was brimming with aggressiveness. Wherever his gaze landed, it made people shiver. It gave Thales a dangerous feeling, just like the silver-black bow across the man's back. It seemed like it was at that critical state where it was going to strike at any moment. Sonia stared at the man with a grave expression on her face as she slowly said, Araka Murch. Once again, you interfered with my soldiers' affairs when I left. Araka Murch? That sounds quite familiar. Thales scratched his head. Poutre, who was standing behind Thales, sighed deeply as he said with a low voice, Your Highness, how good is your ability in smoothing out a conflict? Thales glanced at Poutre with a baffled look. What does he mean? Your unit? The aggressive Araka did not show any signs of backing down. He pointed at Willow Ken on the ground and replied to Sonia in a hostile-sounding voice, Do you mean this cowardly deserter that you recruited from the local village? I am not an army deserter. I am only, the young Willow once again spoke nervously. But Araka mercilessly cut him off mid-sentence. Shut up, army deserter. The man who carried the silver-black metal bow on his back erupted in anger. Araka glared at Willow with a fierce gaze, which forced the latter to swallow his words. Cowards do not deserve to talk to me, he said coldly. Willow Ken, who was standing below the scaffold, had a bewildered expression on his face. He opened and closed his mouth before he slouched down like he was wronged. The atmosphere in the area became increasingly worse. Hey, Murch. Sonia's facial expression was dark and gloomy. You are in my territory, and you identified my soldier as an army deserter and a coward without any confirmation. The fortress flower, Sonia seemed like she was also boiling with anger. She stared at Araka with a sharp gaze and enunciated every single word clearly as she said, Are you provoking me? Thales felt the atmosphere before his eyes becoming tenser by the moment. The soldiers around them did not dare make a sound. Araka suddenly grinned and burst into laughter. If you say so, then yes. Under Sonia's increasingly scary stare, Araka stopped smiling. He then swept his eyes past Thales with a gaze that would have made others feel uneasy. So you brought the prince back? Araka laughed as he shook his head. Thales gave him a smile and nodded. But Araka Murch only sneered at him. It seemed like he did not care about the prince's goodwill at all. Thales was momentarily stunned by his behavior. The prince remembered now. This was the person King Kessel referred to when he said he had already dispatched Baron Araka Murch, along with 2,000 regular soldiers of the royal family to Broken Dragon Fortress upon replying to the ex-det diplomat. That was the Baron who commanded the troops, Araka Murch. He did not expect Araka Murch to confront Sonia Sasir, the fortress flower, without showing any signs of backing down. Baron Murch could be heard exhaling softly. He stared at Sonia and faintly said, What? Do you think you have the authority to pamper the army deserter since you are standing on the good side of the king's little bastard? King's little bastard? There was once again an uproar from the surrounding soldiers. Many gazes swept across Thales. Thales' expression became increasingly sour. He already said he is not an army deserter. Sonia's expression was grim. He should have a chance to defend himself. Starlight Brigade never neglects and overlooks any lives. Thales was moved. Starlight Brigade. Willow had a delighted expression on his face while he was pinned on the ground. He nodded desperately, but when he saw Murcha's expression, he decided not to start talking. Never neglect and overlook any lives? As expected of Starlight Brigade's captain of the personal guards. Araka laughed. You carry out the beliefs of that duke of yours truly well. Thales recalled that Sonia was once a member under John Jadestar's Starlight Brigade. He was 80 the Second's younger brother. Captain of the personal guards, it seemed like her status and rank were quite high. Oh, that's right, how did the duke die again? Araka turned around and stared intently at Sonia. The color on the fortress flower's face changed in anger. The kind duke who cherished lives was betrayed by those he claimed to never neglect and overlook. Araka mocked her as Sonia trembled. He died in the hands of those personal guards, whom he trusted the most. What was the name of that traitor, Novork? Sonia clenched her fists tightly and her expression was unreadable. Yes, it was this batch of Starlight Brigade's personal guards of the Duke, who were trained personally by Sonia Sasir. Thales' jaw dropped in shock. Araka's words obviously agitated many people. Because Thales could feel the temperature around Sonia immediately drop after Araka finished talking. The expressions of the dozens of dauntless soldiers behind her, including Genard, abruptly changed. The dozen-something burly men walked forward and stood behind Sonia fiercely. The expressionless sword and shield troops also looked unhappy behind Araka. All of them surrounded Baron Murch. They pressed against their sword hilts and stared coldly at the opposite side. The two groups of people on both sides were ready to jump at each other's throats. Sonia's pupils narrowed slightly as she slowly walked forward with an icy expression on her face. She directly stared into Araka's eyes. He was of the same height as her. Araka also stared back at her coldly. Pa! Right before Araka's eyes, Sonia spat onto the ground next to his feet in a crude manner. There was no trace of politeness in her actions. You are just a feral dog that barks wildly, Araka. Araka only chuckled without saying another word. The fortress flower lifted her gaze to look at the maroon-haired man as she coldly said, of course, I remember the bloody year now. Prince Horus lost his life on the battlefield, but you came back alive. Thales' heart lurched. Prince Horus? The sword of reversing light? This time, it was Araka's expression that changed drastically. His eyes were filled with hatred and rage. Sonia could be heard chuckling as she taunted him and said, who knows, it might be you who backstabbed him. Thales no longer doubted what Poutre meant when he talked about the conflict just now. Because the next moment, Araka's fist and Sonia's palm slammed into each other in the air while both of them seethed in anger. The eastern border between Constellation and Extet, the periphery of lonely old tower. No, I cannot smell the scent of the Brotherhood's doctor anymore. I cannot go any deeper, the road ahead is the road that leads to Broken Dragon Fortress. I heard that the two countries are in conflict against each other now, I do not want to include myself in the battlefield. The head of Blood Bottle Gang's 8 psionic warriors, Nicholas the Red Viper was clenching his fist in frustration as he motioned for his surrounding subordinates to move back. He then looked at the woman beside him. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. Besides, can't you ask Lady Giza for help? Darn it. This woman. Why is she the one who found the blood mystic first? One of the psionic warriors of Blood Bottle Gang, the other cadre who was just a rank below Nicholas, Catherine the Fantasy Blade Edge turned her head over. She gave him a beautiful but ineffably chilling smile. Yo, it seems like we've lost him once again. Catherine laughed mischievously, which caused anger to boil even further within Nicholas. As for Lady Giza, I've mentioned it before, she suddenly had an emergency, so for the time being, she is headed to the west. Catherine stared coldly at Nicholas. The blood mystic trusts me even more, and she will only trust me. Even if the air mystic has disappeared, and even if Song the Divine Chaos Soldier has died, an idiot like you will never take over Blood Bottle Gang. However, she was also exceptionally anxious in her heart. They persuaded the blood mystic with great difficulty to follow them all the way here to track the Brotherhood's strange doctor a day ago. But Giza seemingly felt something. She suddenly disappeared before their eyes after she hurriedly said, I am going to take a look in the west. By the gods, the west was the road to Broken Dragon Fortress. Numerous troops of both countries were gathered there, and the atmosphere was extremely hostile. Even more so, an existence like the fortress flower was there. No matter how powerful the mystic was, she could not possibly fight with an entire army, right? We better settle matters here as soon as we can, Nicholas said in a tone that indicated he was in a bad mood. Blood Bottle Gang has lost a lot of business, many of our partners have already. Sarah Dukedom's women are very dissatisfied with the interrupted human supply, the barren bone people of the desert have started to get in touch with the Brotherhood, the Forerunner Guild have even directly halted their business deals with us. As for those rude swordsmen, they even questioned us about Groudon's death, we are running out of time. I know. Catherine shook her head. They even became aggravated and requested for more orphans from us, we ought to restore our prestige. So, that Dr. Ramon better be as important as you claim he is. Nicholas stared at his colleague and competitor in displeasure. Of course, this is what the Secret Intelligence Department told us through the Cullen family. Catherine chopped off a branch in front of her as she continued to move forward. The source said that if we catch Ramon, we will have control over many secrets of the Brotherhood. The Cullen family? Nicholas furrowed his eyebrows. As for you, stop having delusions about the Covendir family. Catherine mocked. They do not treat us as humans at all. Is the Cullen family any better? Nicholas instinctively refuted, maybe the kingdom's secret intelligence department only wants us to cause some problems to the Brotherhood by giving us this news. Exactly, Catherine said nonchalantly. Nicholas was momentarily stunned. He did not expect that this woman would actually agree with what he said. The Brotherhood expanded way too rapidly, especially after that night at Red Street Market. Almost the entire of Constellation's underground forces had acknowledged their allegiances to Blackstreet. Catherine stopped walking and furrowed her brows in deep thought. Since someone found them very displeasing and wanted to cause them trouble as well as catch the mastermind behind them, the Secret Intelligence Department and the Cullen family may both have this motive in mind, hence the most direct method is to support us. Nicholas smiled scornfully. Are you saying that it was actually a good thing for us to lose that fight at Red Street Market? That was a lesson with a heavy price, reminding us that the mystics are not all-powerful. Catherine hid the disgust in her eyes and tried her best to speak sincerely. Previously, we did things in our own way, and even fought against one another. But during that night, we lost our best and most capable subordinates and people. For the continuation of Blood Bottle Gang, maybe, it is time for us to abandon our previous enmity. Damned viper. She cursed in her heart. Do you still think I am unaware of the fact that you are the one who killed Ralph? Someday. Nicholas stayed quiet for a moment. He seemed like he was carefully considering what Catherine said. Finally, the Red Viper opened his mouth in hesitation. Even though I still do not like you, I have to admit that what you said is reasonable. We are facing our biggest crisis ever since our inception. We must sincerely cooperate to get through this. However, Nicholas was ruthlessly pondering at the bottom of his heart. This damn whore. Do you think that I cannot see through your acting? Catherine put on a smile. I am very happy that you are able to think this way. Nicholas waved his hand and summoned back members of the Blood Bottle Gang as he shrugged nonchalantly. After all, we are in the same gang. For now, let us find that Brotherhood's doctor first. That damned Ramon. Chapter 99, Uncertain Fate. Their fist and palm met each other. Both Araka and Sonia trembled slightly. Thud. It was a low, heavy noise, which sounded extremely similar to the sound of a sandbag landing on the ground. But Thales shuddered, as if a blunt and heavy hammer was struck against his heart. This is a fight between supreme-class elites? It was quiet and simple. Without wasting any energy, without any extra and unnecessary movements. Thales noticed that the crowd was whispering among themselves. Many soldiers were also pointing their fingers at the both of them. Oh, no, how many times has it been? Must they tear each other apart before those Northlanders make their attack? The two commanders were fighting head-on. But at the same time, they continued to stand in their original positions as they resisted each other's attack without backing down even the slightest. Sonia's eyes were unfeeling whereas Araka had a fierce look on his face. The soldiers behind the two of them came to a realization and reacted to the situation. Clang! The veterans behind Sonia drew out their swords viciously and they surrounded their commander in an orderly manner. Thud! On the other hand, the sword and shield troops around Araka had an intense look on their faces. They took precisely one step forward and formed a wall with their shields in order to protect Araka's flanks. The two troops were filled with murderous intent and they glared angrily at each other with mutual hostility. The crowd became increasingly chaotic. My God, Starlight Brigade and the Fury Guards are present at the same time. Didn't the military officer in charge of arranging the work shift intentionally make sure that their shifts would not overlap? Don't tell me someone's going to die this time? I have a bad feeling about this. Almost everyone was watching the confrontation between the two big commanders, with all kinds of complicated feelings stirring within them. Stop. Thales furrowed his brows and took a step forward. Everyone turned around at the same time to look at the prince, who had a sour expression on his face. Thales took a look at his surroundings. What on earth is going on? Sonia and Araka. He sighed. Poutre whispered to him from his back, this is exactly what I was talking about. You are the only who can step in, young prince. Thales shook his head. Back off, soldiers, he yelled at the two parties enveloped in a tense atmosphere. For all our sakes as constellations, put away your weapons. But no one paid him any attention. Sonia and Araka both heard what Thales said, but the enraged duo seemed to be more interested in each other. The subordinates behind them, who according to the crowd, seemed to be the Starlight Brigade and Fury Guards, did not avert their gaze. They just stood behind their respective commanding officers with much loyalty and devotion. The prince was given the cold shoulder as no one acknowledged him. Poutre closed his eyes and shook his head helplessly. The whispers of the onlookers became louder as they pointed their fingers at Thales. Many of their gazes revealed their mockery and ridicule. This child was their new prince? Thales felt that he was in an awkward situation. Extremely awkward. What should I do? Rush forward and pull them apart? But, even though Sonia is in an extremely angry state, that Araka does not seem to be placing any importance on her. I must find something that they care about. His brain was working rapidly. The conversation between Sonia and Araka materialized in his mind. An idea appeared in Thales' head as he took a deep breath. The prince heard his young voice rise into the air, I am Thales Jadestar, the second prince of Constellation. Thales raised his right hand at the two parties and pointed north. Maybe some people know that, for the sake of Constellation's peace and for everyone's lives here in the fortress. I will soon head north to Exted and pay for their prince's death with my life. The surrounding soldiers burst into an uproar. Broken Dragon Fortress was not isolated. The news from the National Conference had already made its way there a long time ago. Many of the people's gazes changed in an instant as they looked at Thales. Some turned into sympathy while some into indignation, anger, and even regret. Yet Sonia and Araka's gazes were still firmly locked onto each other. Thales adjusted his own breathing and tried his best to appear more relaxed as he walked closer to where they were confronting each other. Then he spread his hands and gave them a resigned smile. As for the two commanding officers and your subordinates, before you dig out each other's hearts, you should at least give a Jade Star Prince, who is going to meet his end soon, some proper respect, right? For instance, could you fight only after you have sent me off to my death? The whispers of the surrounding soldiers became increasingly louder. Putre nodded slightly. Sonia and Araka discovered that a barely noticeable crease appeared between their brows. But Thales immediately switched the conversation as he snorted in derision. Oh, of course. Perhaps you have already gotten used to this since for a long time. Thales turned around and stared at the surrounding soldiers as he slipped his hand into his pocket in a relaxed manner. He was prepared to take out the royal family's 9-pointed star brooch and show it to everyone. The next sentence Thales was going to say would have him relying on his last name. However, he could not feel the 9-pointed star brooch. He only had the Fong bracelet in his pocket, which the Night Queen gave him as a keepsake of the Corleone family before they parted. Thales' smile froze for about 0.1 seconds. Damn that Katerina, she did not return the 9-pointed star brooch to me. Nonetheless, the smile returned to the prince's face at lightning speed. He transformed the bewilderment he felt when he stuck his hand into his empty pocket to a relaxed expression, as if he was about to take a picture with his hand in his pocket. Thales turned back to the two people, who were still up against each other's throats, and sneered. After all, this is not the first time the both of you have seen a Jade Star dying in front of you. Just as he finished speaking, the breathing of those two individuals sped up by quite a large margin. A tremble traveled through Sonia's body. Whereas Araka looked like he was struggling. Memories of their past welled up in their hearts. The voices of the surrounding soldiers got even louder. So? You have heard about it as well? Both of them are. Anyway, I do not understand why they find each other so displeasing. 1, 2, 3. Thales was counting the seconds in his heart. Please, give me some respect. He felt the awkwardness welling up in him again. Finally, both of the commanders snorted coldly and abruptly let go of each other. The guards on both sides sheathed their swords, but they still stared at the opposite party with a dark expression on their faces. Thales sighed in relief. By the side, Putre gave him a wicked grin and winked at him. Gilbert would have never been so disrespectful. Thales returned an angry glare towards him. But he knew that the matter was not yet settled. Very good, should we settle the matter ahead of us? Thales rubbed his palms together as he grinned and pointed at Willow Ken, who was stunned. Araka snorted impatiently. Are you going to judge this yourself, young prince? What now, do you have any objections to that? Sonia snorted. He is the most suitable person around here with his status. Thales sighed. No. This is not just a trial. This can also be the conflict and disagreement between two commanders. He looked at Willow, who had a pleading expression on his face. Also, this is about the life and death of a person. He lifted his head and looked at the military officer who was in charge of the execution. Is there anyone who can verify his words? What about the person he saved? The military officer in charge seemed like he had never spoken to any members of the royal family before. He took a step back as he was overwhelmed by the sudden honor of speaking to royalty. Then he shook his head. There is no one, which is why we suspect that he is lying. Thales furrowed his eyebrows. This is not looking good. To confirm whether he is an army deserter, please bring me his weapon. The military officer nodded nervously. Soon, under everyone's watchful gaze, a pair of wooden sticks, which were much shorter than a spear, were presented to Thales. The damaged wooden sticks were still stained with dried blood and the metal tip could barely be seen from the side. From the surface, it indeed seemed like a broken spear. However, Thales stared at the black-haired young man. You can fight with dual pikes? Willow nodded his head forcefully. I can. Another lie, the military officer shook his head and said, there is absolutely no soldier who went through this type of training, not to mention, he is only a fisherman. Thales exhaled deeply. He glanced at the surrounding soldiers whose gazes were burning brightly. He then looked at Sonia's hopeful gaze, Araka's intimidating gaze, and Putre's perplexed expression. If he can use the two pikes proficiently, Thales muttered. Araka lightly snorted at that moment and cut Thales off. Regardless of whether he is an army deserter, there is no doubt that he disobeyed a command and ran back to the battlefield. This intrepid man sneered at the prince. What? If he can use two pikes, are you going to declare him not guilty by using your Jade Star privilege? Esteemed second prince? Thales was stunned. Disobey? This is bad. Then, are you going to directly put him to death? Sonia went head-to-head with him as she replied coldly, what if he is innocent? On the battlefield, no one cares if you are innocent or otherwise. Araka cut her off harshly. It does not matter whether you intended to run or save someone, you disobeyed the rules and you have to pay for it. Sonia was rendered speechless in an instant. She could only turn her head over and look at Thales hesitantly. I respect your decision, your highness. Araka stared at Thales and said in disdain, continue, pardon his crime, and see if he will still disobey the rules next time, perhaps by then, he would not only cause death to himself. Willow's face went pale in an instant. He was drenched in his own sweat as his gaze kept going back and forth between Araka and Thales. Thales furrowed his brows. This is troublesome. Araka, Sonia, Poutre and the surrounding soldiers, including Willow, all directed their gazes on him. What should I do? Hang him? What would Sonia and the surrounding soldiers think about that? Pardon him? What about Araka, the military orders and rules? Or simply change it to another punishment? No, it is not appropriate, darn it. Gilbert never taught me this. Wait, Gilbert? Thales muttered to himself and made his decision. Willow I cannot be certain if you are an army deserter. The second prince walked towards Willow and said to him, and so, I cannot convict you as guilty and I cannot hang you. Willow sighed in relief. See, this is the starting point to losing a war. As expected, Araka snorted and also as expected, he received an angry glare from Sonia. Some soldiers who agreed with Araka started to shake their heads. But what Thales said afterwards made Willow nervous again. However, if you truly disobeyed the rules, I cannot declare you innocent as well. Thales shook his head and said. I cannot pass judgment. Everyone at the scene suddenly fell silent. And then the entire crowd broke into an uproar. Sonia fiercely furrowed her brows. What does this mean? Ha, guilty and not guilty? Araka sneered. So what are you going to do, my prince? How about you shorten the garrote into half? Thales remained expressionless. He raised his hand slightly and clenched his fist to have the crowd quiet down. Thales said softly, but you did say, Willow, that you retreated to save your comrade. Willow lifted his gaze and looked at the second prince, still trembling. It does not matter whether you have truly done this or not, such a spirit is very honorable. Thales' voice echoed among the crowd standing in the narrow street. So, I cannot hang you. A tremble coursed through Willow's body as he stared at the prince in disbelief. Thales continued. It is not because of your conduct, whether it is not guilty or otherwise. But it is because I cannot let the others be afraid of what happens to you after what you did and become hesitant in saving their comrades. This is not something that they should hesitate in doing, Thales replied faintly. The crowd's gazes on Thales changed. Sonia had a happy look on her face whereas Araka furrowed his brows deeply. Only Poutre had a complicated and deep look in his eyes. But Thales' expression became solemn as he said seriously, this does not mean that you are not guilty and that you do not have to pay the price for disobeying military orders. Willow's breathing started to speed up. Willow in the subsequent battles, you must save the lives of more than 10 comrades, Thales said resolutely. This will be the price you have to pay for not being hanged. Only by doing so will you be able to offset the offense of disobeying the rules and wash away the suspicion of being an army deserter. You must save 10 of them. Under everyone's watchful gaze, Thales took out JC's dagger and walked behind Willow without any expression on his face. He placed the sharp blade near the rope that bound Willow's hands together. Thales took a deep breath and forcefully cut the rope. 1, 2, 3, Abashed, Thales discovered that the strength in his hand was a little too weak. Perhaps, with his current speed, he would have needed more than 10 seconds to cut open the tied rope. He felt the gazes of the crowd surrounding him. The atmosphere is very much ruined. At this very moment, that familiar fluctuation rushed into both of Thales' hands. It was as if his blood suddenly sped up. The muscles in his right hand trembled and a strength much stronger than what he could usually muster erupted forth from within him. Rip! The rope around Willow's hands was cut off in an instant. Thales put his dagger back and forced himself not to look at the bloody wound he accidentally caused on the back of Willow's hand. Ahem. Therefore, I will use your future behavior in exchange for your current life and freedom. Do you understand, Willow He stared solemnly at Willow, who had just regained his freedom. Willow was panting as he kneeled on the ground and looked at Thales. He parted his trembling lips. Yes, Prince Thales, he shouted in excitement. Save 10 people. I will remember it. There is another request, Thales said indifferently. Willow was momentarily stunned. All of a sudden, Thales put on a smile, which had disappeared for a long while and said, Go, and change those 2 pikes of yours. They cannot even stab a fish in the river to death in their worn-out condition. Willow took 3 deep breaths. Then, he put on a smile that showed his relief of being let off the hook. Willow nodded desperately. Yes, I will sincerely obey your command. Thales turned his head around and looked at his surroundings. Sonia gave him a smile and looked at him with a gratified expression. Very appropriate, Your Highness. The fortress flower walked brusquely over to Thales, and while Thales still had a sour expression on his face, she lifted him from the ground. It was unknown who was the first who started to clap, but one by one, the surrounding soldiers started to applaud. There were even some people who started to cheer. There was also someone who shouted, Our prince! Sonia laughed heartily and held Thales on her shoulder. His complexion had become utterly pale. She rubbed his head with all her strength. You are one qualified jade star. Sly little brat, Araka stared coldly at Thales as he mumbled to himself. He swung his arm as a gesture for his subordinates to leave. Then, he exited the area together with his subordinates while the crowd applauded. Only Ida had a confused expression on her face as she asked the pensive Poutre standing by her side, What did he just do? Thales, who had always been originally weak and feeble, became increasingly dizzy when he was placed down after Sonia swung him around in 2 circles. He could only grab onto Poutre's robe powerlessly and retch. Under the lead of a few soldiers, Poutre and Thales walked towards the barracks, which had been prepared for the prince. Ida followed them and she had a sick complexion, again due to the freezing weather. Thales sighed, I thought trouble would only arrive after we reach Extet. However, Poutre did not reply him. Your Highness, Poutre said quietly. He did not notice that he was using honorifics while speaking. What did you think of that solution? Thales was briefly taken aback. You did not kill that soldier, instead you made him commit meritorious deeds in the future, Poutre said as he walked. Thales rubbed his cold, red hands together and puffed out a breath of warm air against the air. About that, Gilbert was actually the one who told me about it. It was related to my uncle, my dear Jadestar. Poutre's expression changed and he furrowed his brows. Gilbert said that he had once messed up a diplomatic task because he did not cooperate well with his colleagues. Thales recalled the conversation and did not pay any attention to Poutre's expression. But Prince My Dear did not punish him. Rather, he allowed Gilbert to make up for the debt that he owed Constellation with greater meritorious deeds in the future. Poutre furrowed his brows tightly whereas Thales lifted his eyebrows. The Far Easterners also have a saying that goes atone for one's crimes by performing good deeds, but that is only limited to important people. I could not directly use the saying to save a low-ranked soldier like Willow, so I had to use the reason of saving his comrades in order to convince other people. But in the end, this is not a really good solution. Thales spread his hands. Think about it, if all the army deserters come back and say, I ran away to save my comrade. So, you are imitating Prince My Dear? Poutre did not listen to Thales speak, but he slowly said, Gilbert probably hopes that you will be the next My Dear. Thales was confounded. He scratched his head. This matter probably affected Gilbert very deeply. Ah, yes. Poutre let out a long sigh. He was thinking about something in his heart when he said, Gilbert indeed saved the entire of Constellation during the negotiation of the Fortress Treaty after that. He atoned for his mistake of being hostile towards Steel City, otherwise, according to the law at the time, this matter was more than enough to send him to jail. Thales turned his head around in curiosity. Oh, Poutre, you also know about this incident? Of course, Your Highness. Poutre seemed like he had already gotten used to addressing Thales as Your Highness. He spoke in a faint manner. That year, Gilbert did not mess things up because he did not cooperate well with his colleagues. Thales widened his eyes. At the time, Gilbert was only a descendant of a degraded noble. He was ostracized and deliberately framed by his colleagues when he first arrived at the Foreign Affairs Department as the prince's attendant, which was why he ended up in that sort of plight. Poutre sighed. Ah? Thales asked in bewilderment, is that so? Poutre slowly nodded. So, it was only after that incident did he pour his blood, sweat and tears to contribute to Constellation. He believed it was the debt he owed to My Dear and Constellation. Everyone has their own life's journey and their fate is always uncertain. Thales sighed as he casually shrugged his shoulders. Did he tell you about this matter? No, he did not. Poutre's gaze was deep and his words had a faint tint of grief as well as remorse. But I know more than him. Thales lifted his head. He saw Poutre taking in a deep breath as he slowly enunciated each word. Because, back in the day, I was the person who ostracized and framed him in the Foreign Affairs Department. Thales was stupefied. This is so awkward. About that, he said awkwardly, maybe, if you had not carried out those actions before, Gilbert would not become such a remarkable Foreign Affairs Minister and Administrative Minister today. Yes, maybe, Poutre said bitterly, Constellation is very lucky to have such an outstanding and selfless, no. A familiar voice could be heard behind them. It seemed like the owner was only barely restraining his anger. Thales and Poutre turned around in surprise. The second prince's attendant, Queso, could be seen staring at them, looking unhappy. Why Thales opened his mouth in confusion. He is angry? Your Highness. Waya seemed like he was doing his best to control his emotions. He took 2 deep breaths before he returned to normal and slowly said, Cora, he is dying soon. The color on Thales' face changed immediately. Cora, the head of Jadestar family's private army, was currently lying on the bed in the barracks. His face was pale. I have a younger sister. Cora's eyes were without focus as he spoke in a delirious state. She is in the capital, Queso, who was wrapped in bandages, said with a regretful look on his face, Your Highness, the vampires have injured him too seriously. Thales let out a long sigh. Is there no other way at all to save him? Waya shook his head with a sorrowful expression on his face. We looked for help from every military doctor in the fortress, but they are only military doctors. I am afraid that they do not have such medical expertise. Thales furrowed his brows. Are there any other doctors? Poutre wrinkled his forehead. The Cold Castle is the nearest, and they do have a doctor. But, I am afraid that there is not enough time. Also, the extensions have emptied in short, the road is very unsafe. You have to accept reality. Ida sighed under her cloak. At least, let him leave without any worries and regrets as he gets on his way to Hell's River. Thales looked at Cora, who was lying on the bed. He remembered how he had poked him until the soldier laughed for the first time in Mindy's hall. And also when he brought the swordsmen and mercenaries to fight against the vampires. Cora shielded Thales by putting himself between Thales and Serena together with his comrades. Not to mention, the battle to resist the Blood Clan in the birch tree forest, he closed his eyes in sadness. Darn it! Prince Thales! Everyone turned their heads around. A young man with black hair and brown eyes could be seen standing at the entrance of the barracks. It was Willow Can. That army deserter who was almost hanged. Willow bowed before Thales respectfully and gave him a grateful smile. I am really too happy to see you. I was sent to inform you. He glanced inside the barack and swept his glance over the dying Cora. Willow immediately stopped smiling and he spoke with fear as well as trepidation. About that, the two commanders have invited you and the vice diplomat over. Thales sighed and stared at Cora with a heartbroken gaze. He nodded and walked out of the room along with Putre and Ida. Is that your subordinate, your highness? Willow asked cautiously. Yes, but we are unable to save him. I hope he passes peacefully, Thales said absent-mindedly. Willow, how did you become an orderly officer? Willow shrugged and said helplessly, well, after all, many people still think that I am an army deserter. Thales nodded absent-mindedly but his footsteps came to a stop. No. Let the commanders wait for a while. I am going to send him off to his final destination. He is dying because of me. Thales turned around sorrowfully and looked at Cora, who was on his deathbed. Putre shook his head and waved at Willow. Thales walked back to the bed and stared at Cora, who was still mumbling to himself. Thales clenched his fists tightly. If only Cora and the other Jadestar private soldiers who sacrificed their lives in the birch tree forest had not followed me, hey. Right at this very moment, your highness, that. Willow could not help but voice up. Putre and the others stared at him in displeasure. Please do not make him rush, Waya said unhappily. Please, give the dying some respect, even if you are the ferryman of Hell's River. No, Willow gestured with his hands as he said anxiously. Yesterday, when I was treated as an army deserter, I was directly locked into the dungeon, that dungeon. This is not a good time to express your gratitude, Putre furrowed his brows as he spoke. Ah, no. Willow shook his head. He panted and said, I know someone from the dungeon who was locked up because he seemed suspicious. The young soldier was speaking loudly. That man mentioned that, he's a doctor. Thales and the others were shocked and they stared at Willow. That's right, he also said that his name is Ramon. Willow finally said what he wanted to say. He scratched his head and revealed a bright smile. He is a doctor from the capital. According to him, he has excellent medical expertise. Chapter 100, Ramon 1. The doctor whom Willow had talked about was immediately bound and brought before them. Thales carefully observed the strange man before his eyes. He seemed like he was over 50 years old. He was almost bald but he had sharp features. He had a large nose on his narrow face, and his forest green eyes sparkled brightly. Along with an ugly smile, he seemed weird and made others feel uncomfortable just by looking at him. You must be the new prince. The old man had a unique appearance. He was wearing a yellow, leather coat, which was quite dirty due to coming into contact with the dungeon's surfaces, and he had a strange medicinal smell on him. He giggled without any reason as he bowed a little. My name is Ramon. I am a doctor. Thales furrowed his eyebrows. He waved his hand and signaled Waya to close the barracks door after the soldiers who brought Ramon left. You know about my identity? Ramon extended his neck outwards in a bizarre fashion and nodded his head slightly every once in a while. Along with his smile, which seemed to be frozen across his face, he seemed like a conjurer who performed magic tricks. Heh, news always travels around very quickly, even quicker than you can imagine, especially when the surrounding soldiers were all talking about your name. Putre took a step forward and slowly said, very good, there is someone here who needs medical treatment. If you are a doctor. He looked at Cora. Ramon was smiling strangely when he stretched his neck outwards and glanced at Cora's direction. I can try, but I cannot guarantee success. He walked over to Cora, but he suddenly turned around. Ramon stared at Thales in an unusual manner with his eyeballs bulging out. I heard that you are heading up north to Extet, your highness? Waya and Ralph both furrowed their brows. Thales nodded. This old man, he is a little strange and a little creepy. But he is a doctor, no matter what. Ramon walked slowly to Cora's side, it seemed like he was thinking deeply about something. It is a good journey, Extet. The strange doctor carefully observed Cora, who was slightly trembling. Cora had a really pale complexion. A brave warrior, a superclass swordsman with the power of eradication. Ramon lifted Cora's weak arm and his eyes were shining brightly. He has a bad habit whenever he swings his sword. He prefers to strike and fight face to face with his opponent. His upper right arm and back muscles will probably start to hurt after he is 60 years old. Under Waya and Ralph's surprised gaze, he slowly unraveled Cora's bandages. There are cuts and lacerations across his chest and back. The injuries were not immediately treated. I am unsure whether it was because the situation was urgent or because he was unaware of them. And he endured this pain for so long. Even if I close my eyes, I can still tell that his wounds were caused by the sharp claws of a vampire. Thales' expression suddenly became serious. This doctor, it appears that he does have some skill? Average blood loss, weak physical body. The main point is that these two wounds were not treated correctly and they have festered quite badly. If the wounds are not immediately treated, I guess he'll probably last for one more day? Ramon turned around and clicked his tongue twice. He looked at Thales and he smiled without saying a word. What now? Poutre slowly asked, can you save him? Had ha. Ramon stared at Thales with a contemplative gaze. Most doctors would probably find themselves helpless before this case. Thales wrinkled his brows. They can only depend on luck and wait for the swordsman to recover on his own or die. He released a puff of warm air and spoke slowly. Everyone seemed to be concerned. Poutre opened his mouth and spoke quietly, wait, you said most doctors? Ramon only chuckled in response. Thales raised his hand and indicated to Poutre that he would be asking the questions. The second prince stared at Ramon seriously and asked, do you mean that you can save him? Ramon winked with his right eye and sniffed around with his strange nose. I did not say so. But I can try. With a little bit of medication, I will treat the wounds and cut off the rotten flesh, as for the chances of saving him. Poutre, who was standing beside Thales, furrowed his eyebrows. Ramon once again smiled in a bizarre fashion. That depends on the reward, you know, reward. Thales once again raised his eyebrow. You will receive the proper reward. Thales then added another sentence without changing his expression. Enough remuneration. I can vouch on the reputation of the royal family. It was not his money anyway. Ah, you misunderstand me. Ramon laid down the dying Cora, and his eyes shone. I only have one request. He squinted his eyes to scrutinize Thales carefully. I have had enough of this dungeon. He tried his best to put on a friendly smile and said, when the prince heads north to Extet, please bring me along. The barracks fell into silence for a moment. Thales stared at the miserable-looking Cora on the bed and he clenched his fists gently. Bring him along? You know I do not have the authority to let you come. Thales forced down the discomfort at the bottom of his heart. I am not the commander here. The doctor, Ramon smiled with a fox-like grin, in a manner that revealed the upper row of his teeth. He sneered cunningly. But your father is the commander of the commander's commander, am I correct? Also, you are not letting me go, but you are placing me under your custody. This is absurd. Waya snorted lightly. Are you negotiating with the prince? It is only a request. Ramon placed his hands together and laughed. If my request is granted, I believe I will work even harder and do my utmost in treating this seriously injured, dying man. Thales stared at him with a grim expression on his face. No, you are not only negotiating, you are also threatening me. On top of that, you are leaving a man to die without helping him. Are you really a doctor? Ramon spread his hands and revealed his yellow, mottled teeth. How could I be so preposterous? What I mean is, even a doctor can only try his best in saving a person. If I fail, you can throw me back into the dungeon, or even make things hard for me, your highness. Of course, if he is lucky enough to be saved by me, I just need some of your kindness to bring me out of the dungeon. This man, lying on the bed, seems like he is in excruciating pain. You only need to bring me on this one journey. You have a few too many conditions. Waya took a step forward and said coldly. I am only making a suggestion. Ramon laughed. Whether to accept or not depends completely on his highness himself. Thales said quietly, if I say no and I do not agree to let you out of the dungeon or agree to bring you along with me, will you then refuse to save him? Ramon chuckled. Of course not. But a cold light flickered within the doctor's eyes. Hee, but you know, my medical skills very much depends on luck. Hee, if he does not survive, you cannot blame it on me, hee. It is a pity for such a heroic soldier. Hey, it seems like he took a blow for his comrade. Poutre's expression changed. You are bargaining with Constellation's prince. He snorted. This is disrespectful. How would I dare do such a thing? Ramon shook his head. I just believe in the prince's kindness and wisdom. Anger boiled in Waya's heart as well. You know, we can also send you back to the dungeon. The ferryman can also send him across Hell's River. Ramon pointed at Cora who was lying on the bed. He then cunningly spread his hands as if to say he could do nothing about it. As for Ralph, he was staring at Ramon coldly. Poutre glanced at Cora, who seemed like he was struggling in a nightmare as he leaned close to Thales' ears with an unhappy expression on his face. Maybe, we can promise him first, as long as Lady Cecile becomes the one who steps in and arrests him at the very last moment, you will not be considered to have broken your promise. Thales pursed his lips tightly together. He lifted his head and cut off Poutre's whisper. Thales looked over at Ramon. Was he the only professional doctor around Broken Dragon Fortress? You know, I can actually promise to do all the things you have just requested of me, Thales quietly said. Poutre's expression became strained. Thank you. Ramon chuckled and said, this is as easy as lifting a finger to you, your highness. I believe Lady Cecile will respect your. However, Ramon's chuckles were cut off. But I just had a very bad day, Sir Ramon. Thales exhaled with a hostile expression on his face. He lifted his head. And do you know why? The words that were at the tip of Ramon's tongue instantly died away. Because I allowed a stranger to join my diplomat group, even if he was actually loyal to me. Thales took a deep breath and continued speaking under Waya and Poutre's worried gaze. But in the end, I lost more than half of my manpower, all of them bled for me and sacrificed their lives for me. This may even include Cora, who is lying on the bed now, he said coldly. I do not like it when someone uses this to negotiate with me. Ramon was slightly stunned. Thales lifted his head and heard himself speaking in a low voice, also, this lesson has taught me to always maintain enough vigilance towards things I do not understand. Ramon lowered his head and listened to Thales as he enunciated each word. For example, at the border, where the confrontation of two kingdoms is currently happening, a suspicious doctor with strange characteristics has been locked up in the fortress dungeon. For some unknown reason, he has made a request to join my team to head towards Extet, or his future will not be certain because that place is even more dangerous. Ramon furrowed his brows without realizing it. This prince. Thales continued and said, the dungeon of Broken Dragon Fortress may be uncomfortable, but at least, it is safer and more reliable than the border of the two kingdoms. The atmosphere there is tense as of now. It is also safer and more reliable than my diplomatic journey, where the future is uncertain. Yet, you requested to head north to Extet. You are not doing this to leave the dungeon at all. Thales raised his head slightly as he spoke. Ramon stared at the young prince before him with a peculiar expression on his face. You are willing to sacrifice your safety and benefits to provide medical services to the prince's team, and you request to follow him in this dangerous journey. Thales sat on his chair and crossed his arms. You must be a saint, Dr. Ramon. Thales shook his head as he slowly said, if you are not, then you must have some hidden motive. Ramon furrowed his brows tightly. This is bad. It appears that this young prince is not as easy to fool as I had imagined. I just need to leave this place, Ramon exhaled as he lifted his head and said, but the imminent war in the world outside is too dangerous. I thought it might be safer to follow the prince's diplomat group. Safer? Thales stared coldly at him. Even a child as young as 3 years old knows that we owe a blood debt to King Nuvan and we are going to the country he governs, safe? All right. I will not place any hopes in obtaining your guard's protection anymore. You do not have to bring me along the whole journey. I will immediately leave once we arrive in Extet. Ramon blinked and laughed wryly, feeling helpless. I only want something so simple. I guarantee you I will cure him. Besides, I can also help in other matters. Ramon adjusted his breathing and turned to Waya and Ralph. For instance, this young man's injury, I guess it was also caused by the vampire? And also you, the fellow with the silver mask, your arm is fractured, this cannot afford to wait. Waya exhaled. Ralph's expression was hostile. Are you certain that you can cure him? Thales asked in a loud and strange tone. Oh, that is not what you said just now. Ramon's mind went blank as he mumbled under his breath, I am very confident in myself. Earlier, I was just trying to ensure that I would be able to get out of the dungeon and also avoid being dragged into war, but Thales did not believe him. The prince once again cut him off. I will give you another chance to answer my question. What is your motive? Ramon was dumbstruck as he stared at Thales. Damned little shit. After a second, Ramon suddenly laughed. He spread his hands and shrugged indifferently. All right, since the prince does not believe in me, then I better go back to the dungeon. But he did not manage to finish what he wanted to say. You have used up your chances, Dr. Ramon. Thales suddenly smiled at him. You are the one who forced me to do this. Ramon's pupils contracted. What? What is he going to do to me? Passing out punishment indiscriminately as one pleases is a privilege that only belongs to a tyrant. Ramon grinned as he slowly said, also, you are still young, right? If news travels out. Poutre stared at Thales in confusion. The prince visibly leaned backwards as he looked at the confused Ramon. Thales raised his right hand and pressed it against the side of his forehead. I will apologize to you in advance. Thales chuckled and slowly said, I also do not want to treat you like this. I did not want to use this sort of forbidden power. What? Poutre, Wyatt, Ralph, and even the constantly inattentive Ida, who were standing by the side, were all stunned. Power? What power?